One, two,
Testing.
three.
One, two, three.
Because
Testing.
Windows.
One. Sweet. All right, I'm ready to go when you're.
Right. I am now recording.
I am now recording as well.
All right, 3, 2, 1. Welcome to the Windows Central Podcast, episode 155 for November 15th, 2019. Hey everyone, I'm Dan Rubino here, joined with Zach Bowden for another exciting episode of the Windows Central Podcast. And I'm multitasking. I just tweeted while I was talking, which I'm pretty
Did you?
happy about. Yes. So, but this week we'll be talking about the Surface Pro X. I do have one in front of me. My review is almost done. Actually, if you're listening to this recorded, then it's probably already live on Windows Central, so you can go check it out. But if you're listening to us live, it's not live, but I'll give you a preview of what I'm going to talk about. Also have some new Edge news, including it being released on ARM, which was a heck of a coincidence. I wonder why that happened. We'll also talk a little bit about Cortana and Ignite and some of the news we heard there and Outlook, as well, of course, as new Windows 10 build news. Microsoft has pushed out a few more builds since we've last had this podcast, and Zach will go through and tell us. I'm not even actually keeping up on any of this stuff anymore. I really don't know what didn't something ship this week. Don't we have a live update this week? And now there's and we're still on fast ring for 19H. Oh no, okay. Yeah, you'll explain it because I haven't been following this stuff for a while now. But we'll get to it. Zach, how are you doing on this fine Friday?
I'm very tired. It's been a long week, Dan.
Yeah, I kind of concluded with that. A lot going on in the United States too, but we won't talk about that.
Yeah.
We'll do it at the end of the podcast. Nah, it's fine. Also, some video games came up this week too. I believe the new Jedi Fallen Order game is out, which I'm really tempted to buy. Here's a pro tip why you should use Microsoft Bing. I know it stinks outside of the United States, apparently. Zach can testify to that. I use it in the United States, but I have accumulated over the years a lot of Bing points, and I've never redeemed them. I had almost 300,000, and I started redeeming them to basically buy video games because you can use it to buy a gift card for Xbox and then apply that to your purchase. So I'll probably end up doing the Jedi Fallen Order, which has been getting pretty good reviews. It's on Xbox One X this week. I also did, though, get my Nintendo Switch Lite in a few days ago, and I'm very actually happy with that. I'll probably should do a mini review of that. Maybe I'll do it at the end of the podcast if we have time. I really like it. It's the limited edition. How do you say it? Pokemon? Sorry.
I don't care.
I know. It's a Pokemon edition. I'm kidding, of course. I don't follow Pokemon, but I know it's a big deal. Anyway, let's get to the big Windows 10 news. Zach, tell us what's going on. What are we on this week? And what are we getting and why?
Yeah, I mean, I understand your enthusiasm around this topic. It has been really boring in the world of Windows this year. Not much has gone on in regards to new features. 20H1 has been more or less a snooze fest. 19H2 was the definition of a snooze fest. And that hasn't changed, unfortunately. So regarding 19H2, let's do it chronologically. Microsoft has made 19H2 available to the public this week. It's now officially official. It's available to consumers, to the public who wish to go out and download it if they wish. Now, this is using Microsoft's new Windows Update policy, which means although it's available now, it will not be automatically installed on PCs unless you're running a version of Windows 10 that's out of support. So that means if you're running version 1809 or 1903, you won't get this update automatically. You have to go into Windows Update and press on a button to download version 1909. If you're running version 1803 or lower, then this will automatically be installed for you at some point in the near future. And version 1909 is a really nice update. It's like I said, it's sort of like a service pack that sits on top of 1903. Has a couple of noteworthy new additions here and there, some improvements to the notification system and being able to configure how notifications show up on your PC. Some improvements to search in File Explorer, and that's basically it. Not too much going on in the world of 19H2, but it's available now. So if you've been waiting for the official public version, that is now available to download through Windows Update, and you can check for it now. Regarding 20H1, not much movement in this department. 20H1 is basically done at this point. We've talked about this before. I'm expecting there to be a final build in December, which will roll out to insiders, and then from December to March, they'll just sort of test it in the release preview ring, because they like to test the final build for a long time now, because As is usually the case, the final build will be compiled, but then Microsoft will keep iterating on it with patches up until release, just to make sure the build is as stable as it can be when it rolls out to the public in the spring of 2020. This week, they released 2 builds to the Insider program and the fast and slow rings. The only notable change here really is that they've made some more improvements to Windows Search. Um, yeah, that's basically it. It says, your feedback helps us make improvements then and helps us focus on 3 key areas of improvement in 20H1: excessive disk and CPU usage, general performance issues, and low perceived value of the indexer. Based on this, we're introducing an algorithm that detects high disk usage and activity so it can better identify peak usage times and manage the indexer accordingly. We're also making changes for developers to prevent searches for certain repositories and project folders to improve disk usage. So if you've had problems with Windows Search in the past, perhaps it'll be better now. I know Windows Search for many people has been kind of a joke the last couple of years, and Microsoft has been listening to feedback and has been making improvements. So hopefully we're at a point now where Windows Search is actually useful again. But otherwise, basically, that's it. Known issues list is very small now. There's only 4 notable known issues. And that's because, like I said, we're basically just about done with 20H1. And that's your update for Windows development. Nothing going on. Hopefully, we'll get the manganese builds next week or the week after. I know they're pretty close and they're ready to go. We're just waiting for 20H1 to sort of wrap up at this point. But yeah, that's basically it for Windows builds. Not a lot going on.
Sorry, zone out. Well, I was reading about Bitcoin.
Yeah. Well, why? What's the one? Why is
It
Bitcoin
was
in the
more
news?
interesting.
You got blockchain. Yeah. Like
Yeah,
I say, Windows
blockchain.
development is so. Do you know why this is though? This is pretty genuine. It's because a lot of the focus internally is on Windows 10X right now, and
Yeah,
rightly so. You know, like,
sure.
that's the new UX. Everyone's busy sort of making that the best it can be, and trust me, it needs a lot of work right now because internally 10X kind of sucks. Hopefully, in a year's time,
And
it won't though.
and to defend Windows here, I kind of don't care. I mean it's fine. Like
Yeah.
Windows is fine. I'm running Windows. It works. I
Hmm.
don't have any major complaints. I'm not one of you UI people who are just like this third icon has a strange line in it and it's the shadows. I'm not one of those people. I don't care. It works for me. I'm happy with it. So I don't really have. I don't know what else I'd want in Windows 10. I do want Windows 10X. So I am happy that they're sort of focusing on that. I'm more interested actually in what Microsoft is doing with services and building its apps and adding new features to those things. I think that's actually a little bit more interesting. But for me right now, Windows 10 is just like Windows 10 is my desk, right? It's a solid piece of wood. It's
Yeah.
there. It does its job. I'm more interested in what I'm putting on the desk at this point. So although I rag on this insider program stuff a little bit, it's I mean we've been saying this for years. There will be a point where you run out of big banner stuff to throw into the operating system, uh, without overcomplicating things. That said, this thing with the indexing and the improvements there and AI, I think is super kind of cool. Actually, this is again where I think using machine learning is actually a really interesting aspect. So that like yeah, your computer can be indexing just not when your peak hours of usage. Like, there's no reason why in 2019, your computer can't learn your behaviors and how you're using it and adjust accordingly, right? And they are doing that. We're seeing this a lot more in Windows 10. But there should be like if I'm always in front of my PC, roughly from 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. every day, the computer should kind of figure that out. Like, hey, 90% of the time he's in this area. That's where the activity is. Let's do, updates and indexing on the other hours, right? So they're getting there with that stuff. And I think that's the way, I think that's going to be one interesting area of like computers that people haven't made a big deal of yet. We haven't seen too much of it. But this idea of machine learning and AI, making the operating system better and catering to your needs, I think is going to be really interesting. 10th gen Intel stuff does this a little bit. I've talked about it before in relation specifically to the XPS 13 2-in-1, where they're using Dell's using kind of like an AI thing where it adjusts the processor speed based on certain applications you're using. So instead of the stepping technology being an all or nothing, whether you're running Minecraft or Mindhunter or Microsoft Word, it actually sees the app you're using and adjusts the CPU accordingly. Because you don't necessarily need to run 4 gigahertz to do Microsoft To Do, right? You may want to run at 4 gigahertz if you're going to be compiling an app and running Visual Studio. So hopefully we'll see more of this stuff. That's what I'm interested in. It's all the under the hood stuff and the application stuff. But
Oh, real
um,
quick, before we move on from this topic, I should probably also mention that the Insider program actually made quite a big change last week, I think it was, because we didn't do a podcast last week. They got rid of the skip ahead ring. That's no longer a thing. So if you was an insider in the skip ahead ring, you've now been down, air quotes, downgraded back to the fast ring. And there's a reason for that, I believe. I think it's because the skip ahead ring technically wasn't a real ring to begin with. And because of the schedule alignments now and whatnot, skip ahead kind of no longer makes sense because the next release is sort of supposed to be the next one anyway. I believe we'll see how that plays out when they start flighting manganese and whether or not that's 21H1 or 20H2.
I didn't even know that. I didn't know they got rid of skip ahead. That's
Yeah,
kind of
that's
fun.
gone. Yeah, so it's no longer a thing. Which means if you're using like app previews, because I believe the skip ahead ring also gave you access to early apps like the release preview ring does. I'm guessing the app previews are now in the fast ring and stuff. So who knows? But yeah, that's basically that. That's all of the updates around the Insider program for this week.
Sounds good. A 19H2 shipped, I guess.
Yes, I already
So
mentioned that, Dan.
yeah, I know. So like, but what's interesting about that is that really how it's a really tiny update. And it also went to previously Microsoft would release this update and then it was a rollout staggered. And for some reason, Surface devices were always like the last to get them. But this week, basically everything just got it. It was a simple
Yeah, because it's just sits on
cumulative
top of the
patch.
old update. You know how they actually did it? The reason why it's so small is that all of the features in 1909 are actually in 1903 and they're just disabled. They released them
Yeah.
to 1903 as off by default. You can't enable them. What 1909 is an enablement package, as Microsoft calls it, which essentially you download a switch that just turns on the features and then it updates your version to 1909 and the build number slightly, but otherwise 1909 is 1903 just with a few additional features enabled. And I think that's kind of cool. I kind of hope that they do the same thing with every H2 release, but Microsoft refuses to confirm or deny whether that's the plan, likely because they just don't know.
But yeah, I was gonna say, I mean, probably because this is the first time they did it and they want to see if it worked well.
Yeah,
So,
yeah,
but I agree. It was a lot of people commented on like I think it was like a 4 megabyte download
yeah.
for, and it just as you said enabled the features that were already there. It was like the remake of War of the Worlds with Tom Cruise, where the ships were here the whole time. They were just activated. There's your pop culture reference. I really like that movie, by the way, except for the cabin scene and the ending, because the son should have been killed because he was terrible. But
Nice.
I'm also a mean
Thanks,
person,
thanks for
so
your review of the movie.
yes, I still love that movie though. It's a great movie. Nothing beats the original though. But anyway, yeah. So that's the news for Windows 10. All eyes Windows 10X. Speaking of the future of Windows, let's talk about Edge. Edge has had a heck of a roller coaster ride this last week. Um, I Let's talk about first of all. We didn't even talk about the new logo thing, right? We didn't get to do that in the
We did
podcast,
not
did
get to
we?
do that, no.
All right. So they did a new logo. I tweeted out about how
More
I think
enthusiasm, Dan. Come on.
I
New
know
logo.
I tweeted out like I mean I like it, right? But I don't have deep thoughts on logos. Like I look at them like okay, it looks I like it. I think it looks nice, but that's about as deep as I went with it. Where other people had huge diatribes about and deep thoughts and life philosophical choices about logos, which I don't have. And it was kind of cool. They did have like a little game that you could play that was like a you had to they left trails on Reddit and people unlocked them and then there was eventually you had to create certain an edge using the not the sets feature. What was it called? The collections feature.
Yes,
You had
correct.
to enable collections, which still wasn't active yet, and then you had to create collections to spell the word surf, and then I unlocked a game. And the game was actually really cool to play. It was this old school kind of surfing kind of game that was like 8-bit or whatever. It was actually very difficult, and if you got to the end you got to see the new logo. Now it was basically how they revealed it. It was really clever. It was smart. It was way too nerdy for me to do. I only jumped in once it was solved. You did get a badge, which would show up in your about screen on Edge saying that you completed it. But I'm really disappointed. That does not sync across devices. Like it should. Like I'm on all my Edge Canaries right now, and they don't have that badge anymore, and I'm really disappointed in that. Uh, but still, so new logo came out. It's cool. I mean, I don't know. I like the new. I don't know. It looks
Would you like
nice,
to
right?
describe the logo for the audio listeners?
Yeah, it looks like a wave. Like,
it's like a surfing wave.
yeah, yeah. So it's like I thought it was clever. But a lot of people are like, "Oh my God, it looks just like Chrome, looks just like Firefox." Like only in the sense of it's kind of roundish.
Yeah.
Like I don't really see like I don't know. I feel bad for some of these people who think that like they just go through life and they just like look at cars and they're like they're all the same. They all look exactly the same. Like they don't though. Like I don't know. But yeah, I thought it looked kind of nice. They had the new Canary and Dev and Beta tags on them too, which looks cool.
Hmm.
Um, but I thought it was a smart decision. We did now sit down with Aaron Woodman at Ignite. We talked about Edge. We didn't write this up really, but you and I both had some specific questions regarding this. You brought up the question, like, did you guys think about renaming Edge
Yeah.
since you're already going down this path? And he said, yeah, he said everything was on the table. Like it was one of those, there was no restrictions on this idea like a new logo or even a new name. It was basically if you come up with a cool name and we all kind of agree on it and think it's a good approach, yeah, we'll maybe do that. That said, he also pointed out that the issue they had, people had issue with not the Edge name as a browser. They had an issue with the actual browser. That is the old version of Edge.
Hmm.
And this new version, the Chromium Edge, is fine. So it was never an issue of really branding for them. That was the problem with the underlying technology, which I think a lot of people here would agree with. And so they decided to stick with Edge name, which again, I think it's fine. I don't think they needed to rename it.
Hmm.
But the new logo does go that little extra step to go, hey, this is something different here. This is actually new this time. And so I thought it was pretty clever. They also, I guess, if you want to talk about the release date and the plans for that.
Yes, so they also announced that the new version of Edge will be made available to the public on January 15th. That'll be the first day in which the new Microsoft Edge is official and is shipping to the world, and users will be able to go in online and download it as a stable browser, which is quite exciting. Now, Microsoft is sort of focusing this initial launch towards the enterprise. They've very much been focusing on that sort of market. They say that a more consumer-focused launch will be happening spring next year, but I don't know what that means specifically. I'm guessing
Commercial.
oh yeah, well, I don't. Yeah, like maybe some new features, perhaps. I don't know, but yeah. So the sort of the browser in its current state in the Canary and the Dev channels is basically going to be what ships in January. So collections will be there, I believe, and all the sort of privacy enhancements that they've added so far. The new UI, which is kind of nice compared to old Edge at least. That's all going to be there on day one as well. ARM support is a mystery right now. Although ARM support is now in the Canary Ring, they said to us at Ignite that it won't be there at launch. But I'm guessing it won't be far behind if it isn't there on
I
January
thought they
15th.
did. I thought they said it was going to be at launch.
Maybe they've changed their stance, but when I asked at Ignite, they said no, it won't be there January 15th.
Yeah, so let's talk about that briefly. So I got and we'll talk about this a little later too, the Surface Pro X.
Mm-hmm.
And even I was at Ignite, and I was talking to some Microsoft people who, I won't name them, but I mentioned that Microsoft didn't even have an ARM64 version of the new Edge available to download
Mm.
for those buying the Pro X. A lot of people at Microsoft were like, really? That sounds weird. I'm like, I know, especially because we all know there are internal ARM64 builds. They've been out since April. People have been able to download them through methods, we'll just say, since I think June or July I started getting them, and I've been using them since. And this isn't a case of like, oh, it's super rough. Like they don't want to release this because it's just like it's really early. They ran fine. Like I made them my default browser on all my Windows 10 ARM devices, and they're great. The only downside to them, and I don't know if that was a bug or if it was because it's purposely chosen that way, they didn't auto update, which was annoying. So you had to basically, whenever, every couple of weeks, depending whenever you wanted to, go pull a new build and reinstall it. So that was a pain. But I think that was done internally. I think they just didn't enable that feature. I don't think it was like a bug. But presumably there was something about it that was like showstopper, right? That they were like, we can't release this for some reason. We'll probably never know what that is. I also don't kind of care because if you're going to have a canary ring, literally Canary Ring is that. Like
Yeah,
Canary
I
Ring,
agree.
you're installing something that's like this. Listen, this could be a time bomb. We don't know what's going to happen. I mean, I give them the benefit of the doubt. This won't melt my computer when I install it, but the idea of Canary is high risk that you install it and like, yeah, you may not be able to log into websites, or you may have some like really annoying bugs. That's the point, and why you also then have developer and then beta after that, which so, like, why didn't they release it to Canary at least, right? Instead, this is what Microsoft did in their infinite wisdom. They released the Surface Pro X, their flagship premier Windows 10 on ARM device. This is the device that's supposed to really kind of get the ball rolling on ARM. And trust me, there's a lot more on ARM coming, even by the end of this year. So I know some people are here like, oh, Microsoft's going to stop ARM. No, it's every year we go through this where it just gets bigger and bigger, and it's gonna happen again. So like, get ready for it. ARM is here to stay, and you're going to see a lot more of it. Um, but so they released this device. They gave it to some reviewers. We didn't get ours for a week later, partly because apparently there's just not a lot of them. That's what we were told, and if people who are ordering them they are on back order right now. So there's definitely something going on there. But what did every reviewer do? They were given guidance by Microsoft. Here it is. Here are the limits. This and that. 90% of reviewers just went and installed Chrome because that's the market, right? That's what people do. And Microsoft couldn't be like, listen, you can install Chrome, but we recommend using the new Edge browser because they'll get better battery life and battery performance. They couldn't do that. Instead, everybody reviewed it with Chrome. And what happens when you run an x86 app that's, especially Google, on an ARM device? It works. And it actually runs pretty well in terms of performance. Not as good as ARM64, but the battery life is going to go down because you're running an emulation layer and it stays active. Even if you minimize it, the emulation layer is still active. And so you had a lot of people at the Surface Pro X going, the battery life on this thing ain't amazing. And they're right, because if you're going to run just x86 apps on this, 32-bit ones, battery life is not amazing. And so I just don't understand why Microsoft would do this. Like, I get it's not ready, but you couldn't give, reviewers the ARM64 version of Edge and be like, listen, this is basically Chrome. It's our new thing. It's coming out soon. You should really try to do your review with this. You can still use Chrome, but try it with this. They couldn't do that. And so then they got all these reviews out. I wrote an editorial last Friday going, Microsoft, what the hell, man? Like, why would you just not, like, just put it into Canary at least? Or you should have not released the Surface Pro X. You should have waited till next year, early next year, until all this was ready. I'm happy to report, as of Wednesday, they released it.
They
It's a Canary.
listened. They listened to our
Yeah,
claims.
I don't want to pat myself on the back because who knows what their plans were. I will say though, it is a little. I kind of do feel like there's truth to this, and this is the reason why. Canary was updated today, as it usually does. It usually gets updated every day. The ARM version is not updated today.
Hmm.
And so it actually has a slightly different build number. It's like a 0.02 at the end kind of thing. My guess is this. Like I think they literally just put it into Canary. They put in the auto update feature and they put it into Canary in response to this kind of outrage. Uh, but it's still sort of like in development, right? It's not still on the same branch as the main one. And I'm totally fine with that. I don't want to rag on Microsoft. This was the right decision, even if it's not going to be updated as frequently and their priority is, typical Intel AMD systems. I 100% agree and understand that. All I wanted was just release something into Canary that I can use that gets updated whenever, every couple of days, every couple of weeks. It's fine, but get something out there. So, but I really do feel like they kind of did like, I think they did shovel this out at the last second in response to this. And it was the right decision to make. But they should have done this 2 weeks ago. They should have really had this all lined up. And we don't know why they didn't, right? And I don't care. Like if you're buying the Surface Pro X, you don't have to worry about it. You shouldn't have to worry about these kind of things. Instead, this is that weird old Microsoft. And while it's on it, Microsoft Teams. Microsoft Teams runs on the new Surface Pro X because there's a 32-bit and a 64-bit version you can download. Not in the store. You have to go to the website and download it. That gets emulated. And it runs basically pretty fine, apparently. But why is it 2 years later, since it's actually 3 years since they announced ARM, but it's 2 years, since those devices shipped. Why is there not an ARM 64 compiled version of Microsoft Teams. Like
Hmm.
how? How are you not? I mean, and for its part, most of Microsoft's apps are UWP. They are optimized. Even Office is confusing. Office is an actual recompiled 32-bit version of Office. It is ARM 64. It just shows itself to the operating system as a 32-bit system. And it does that so you can install 32-bit plugins into it. Because if you didn't, the plugins would be like, that's ARM 64. I can't install in that version of Office. You need the right version. So it actually like apparently cloaks itself as like a 32-bit, but technically it is. Um, but come on, Microsoft Teams, like this is sort of what this device is supposed to be for, and it's still not here. And how does Nadella allow this to happen? Nadella does a lot right in the company, but this is still, I feel like that old
Yeah.
school
Hmm.
Microsoft bullshit. Pardon my language, but it really is. It's that idea of like you're launching a flagship product and your own core, your thing of Microsoft Teams
Doesn't
doesn't
support
run
it.
natively.
Yeah.
It's like,
It's like the
yeah,
teams don't talk to each other, and I
right.
think that's kind of the truth. Really, they just don't seem to talk to each other, or don't seem to think that the other things that people at the company are doing are as important as what they're doing. Teams are probably like, well, the Pro X isn't going to be the most successful device in
Sure.
the world, therefore we don't need to put in the resources
Yeah.
to compile it for ARM. At the same
And I
time,
and I
but
get
that's
that.
not the message you want to be sending. You want to be sending a unified message of
Yeah.
we're doing this over here. It may not be super successful, but we're all in it together. As one company, not as they're trying their own thing. We don't care if it fails. We're doing our own thing over here. I just think that's the wrong way to go about things, in my
No,
opinion.
you're absolutely right. Like I'm sure if we talked to the teams team, they'd be like, we're up to our neck. We have a backlog of stuff we need to do. We got things we're trying to do. We have Slack out here who's competing with like we're already and I totally get that. And I also get the idea that other platforms are sort of a priority. You're right, 100%. I agree with that. But you're right too that it shouldn't be about that. No, customers shouldn't care about those internal things. They should just be like, I got the new Surface Pro X. It costs an arm and a leg. I want to run all Microsoft's, first party apps and services as ARM 64, as this device is intended to make most of it. Um, but you can't, and the Edge browser was one example. They've kind of fixed it. Like what they did this week is literally all I wanted. Like that was the least they could have done, and they did that finally. But it was 2 weeks too late because the reviews for the Pro X have already been pretty negative, and that's because those people couldn't review it. They also had to. Most reviews came out after a firmware patch came out that addressed some other issues, but that's always a problem with these early reviews.
Hmm.
But that's Edge. But Edge is coming along. I mean, listen, I love the new Microsoft Edge. I think it's really good. It's coming along much better than people anticipated. For people who had other questions, we do expect it eventually to be in the store. They did tell us that that probably was going to happen, but it won't be. I think it'll ship. I don't think it'll probably ship in a build of Windows till at least the spring version, but maybe
Yeah.
not even to
So
fall.
I did want to mention that. So we did ask that
Yeah,
question, and although they didn't give us a concrete answer, I believe the sort of time frame is 20H2, 21H1. One of those releases, it'll be pre-loaded into the operating system by default. So when you clean install Windows, the new Edge will be there instead of having to go and download it manually. But Neowin also wrote an article. They talked to somebody else, and Neowin, Rich Woods, heard that Microsoft may even roll out the new Edge through Windows updates. So even existing versions of Windows 10 will get it
interesting.
eventually.
Yeah.
I don't know when that's going to happen, or if that will actually happen, because we were getting mixed messages from a lot of people at Microsoft about sort of the plans for Edge here. But that's another one. That's another possibility as well. So that will be interesting to see.
It's almost like sometimes this is always when we look behind the curtain at Microsoft. Like a lot of times you think there's this grand master
And
plan and
there
they have it. There's
absolutely
just
is
like
not.
there's the chart and like this is the, and then you start talking to people and you're like, oh, they don't really know
They
yet.
don't know a thing.
Like
It's so funny.
they,
Like,
they,
so Microsoft do these internal documents where they're like, "Here's our roadmap for the next
yeah,
year," and they're like, "So we want to get this done by this date and that done by this date." And every single time, they never meet the deadlines. It's like, why do
that's
you even make these
this is like
schedules?
my own to-do list.
Yeah, seriously, it's like
Like today I
that's
gotta
why I don't write leaks anymore, because it always makes me look wrong, even though I was right at some point.
yeah. No, there is this like yeah, and to their it's because of moving parts and what they're
Yeah.
doing sometimes is dependent upon what that other team does, right? So it's like we're going to put it into a build of Windows 10. And then the Windows 10 group could be like, we're not prepared yet to
Yeah,
do
no
that. So,
thanks.
yeah. So it's sort of like, oh, but we want to, so they can't come out and say these things. So, to their credit, but this is, again, as consumers and as, our job, technically we shouldn't care, right? It should
Mhm.
just kind of happen. But eventually, probably in the store, but the main way it'll be through new builds, coming through either Windows Update or when you buy a new PC, it'll be in
Yeah.
there.
I do
So
want to
that's
mention the store thing briefly as well, because although it may show up in the store at some point, again, they weren't 100% confident it will, but they were like, it could possibly show up in the store. If it does,
yeah,
it won't be updated through the store. It will only be there as a
right,
place to download it if you happen to uninstall
exactly.
Edge. Like, it won't be serviced through the Microsoft Store. Once it's installed, it will be using the built-in
The,
updater that it's currently using and whatnot. And you will still be able to obviously go and download the EXE if you want, or the MSIX or whatever.
yeah, yeah. I think that they'll need to do that for. And they probably didn't want to talk about this too much, but things like Windows 10 and S mode, which is still sort of like kind of on its way out as Windows 10X starts to come
Mm-hmm.
into play. But as IT people can sort of lock down systems, and so you don't download executables off the internet. And so you could still get the browser through the store that way. But you're right, it'll auto update internally existing mechanisms. We also talked about PWAs and the status with that, and that too is still kind of in flux. They're very much behind PWA. They very much want to make PWAs an option so that when you go to a website, it tells you. But in terms of some of the stuff that was pre-announced like 2 years ago, a build like this idea that they're going to have web crawlers and pull PWAs and wrap them, put them in the store, that seems to either be completely on hold or just not happening.
Mm.
And part of that's because um, Edge HTML, which is the original version of Edge you have on your PC right now, is what is powering PWAs in the store right now. And so, but they have a new version of Edge coming out, which is powered by VA in a different version of JavaScript and uh, the HTML programs and stuff like that. So they're going to have these two kind of competing systems, and so they don't, but they can't do anything with PWA until this new version of Edge is out there. And we're still months from that. So I think they want to do that transition, but they have to get through this period, this weird, awkward period right now where they still have old Edge as
Yeah.
the main browser and new Edge on the
I think they
horizon.
need to decide whether or not they want users going to the Microsoft Store for web apps or just manually installing them through the browser itself. Because that's the two sort of ways you can do it now. A developer
Yeah.
who makes a web app can put their app in the Microsoft Store, and if they wish, they can use it Edge HTML, or they can package it with the Chromium render and render it through the same rendering engines that Edge uses, or you can just leave it down to the user. The user goes to your website in Edge, and then you get that little Edge pop that says, "Hey, install this as an app," and then you press it, and then it's now installed as an app through Edge. I think Microsoft needs to figure out which way they want to go about things as a permanent sort of method, and I have a feeling they're going to go with the Edge method. I think the Microsoft Store has been incredibly deprioritized as a whole,
Yeah.
not just through PWAs, but just in general. And that's why Windows 10X can run Win32 programs from outside the store, because it's like, users aren't going to the store. Don't get me wrong, I would love it if the store was the number one place to download any and all apps, regardless if it was legacy or modern. But Microsoft doesn't seem to want to be pushing that too much right now, unfortunately.
It's such a weird thing with the store because I think you and me, we use it all the time,
No,
right?
yeah, every app that I need comes through the store, and if it's not there, then I probably don't use it, unless it's
Yeah.
Edge.
And for me, I've been increasingly using Edge's installs app PWA feature,
Yeah.
which I even use for things like Slack and Twitter because you can get Twitter through the store. It's technically PWA and it runs pretty well. But again, it's powered by the Edge HTML engine versus if you use a new Edge browser, you can do the same thing and create install app. It'll actually perform better because
Hmm.
that's the reason why they're going to Chromium. So I use Twitter that way. But and speaking of, Disney Plus launched this week. There's an Xbox app for it, but you can go to in the new Edge browser. I put up a guide how to do this because you can do this with any site, but specifically we did it with Disney Plus. You go to Disney Plus, you log in, and then you go to the menu and you install Disney Plus as an app, and you can pin it to your taskbar, and it's awesome. It just runs like basically as a PWA. It's technically not a real PWA, but like This is that weird fine line. Like you can't do offline video, which is a feature that can be enabled by websites if they want to do that with PWA. Like Disney kind of could make that happen. They haven't yet. Maybe they will. But this is like if you want to use Disney Plus on your PC or your Pro X or any laptop, you can go and do this in the new version of Edge. And it's a really great feature that like I don't think Firefox and Opera have this ability yet. It's part of Chrome and Chromium, and you get it with the new version of Edge. But it really allows. I use this method a lot. I use it for Slack. I use it for Twitter, Airtable, Disney Plus, Mixer.com, and a few others. I just have these pinned. They just run basically like apps. That said, Disney Plus is on Xbox, and this created another rant I did this week about that, which is I don't know how Microsoft solves this problem because Disney Plus is on Xbox. It's a UWP. That's how apps run on Xbox. They're UWP apps. Zach pulled, I imagine you pulled it. I don't know where you got it from, but you got the file for it. You gave it to me because you don't have Disney Plus in UK. I ran it on my PC. I was able to log in, and it uses a different codec than the web version, so the audio and video quality is really, really good. And it basically worked fine. I say basically because it's 95% done. What it doesn't have was keyboard and some advanced mouse controls and touch features, I imagine. And that's for obvious reasons if you were using it on Xbox. But those are like trivial things to add to UWP if you're making one. So how does Microsoft get around this, right? The big thing is they don't want to force developers. Like, oh, you're putting an app on Xbox, you have to then release it for Windows 10 PC. They don't do that. They're like, no, devs. They're like the chill hippies. They're like, yeah, just do whatever you want, man. It's cool. You want to put HoloLens? Go ahead. You want to make one for Windows Phone? Sure, whatever. And devs kind of like that freedom, but the problem with that kind of freedom is we don't have a lot of these apps on Windows 10. Like there's no HBO Now or HBO Go or I don't know, I can't keep up with all those. There's no Showtime. There is Hulu, there is Sling, and there is Vudu, which is nice. But AMC's app doesn't work. Like CBS had one too. And I've heard from a developer that worked on one of these to the credit, like this is the deal. It's Xbox apps are very successful for those types of things. Showtime, HBO. No surprise, people watch TV in their living rooms. So they get a huge enablement there. They don't see the numbers, though, for Windows 10, which comes back to this idea that people don't use the store and all this kind of stuff. And it's a really frustrating thing. And so, like, you'll see companies actually have pulled their TV apps, right, from Windows 10, but then kept them on Xbox. And it's weird because Disney Plus, I feel like the same developer probably could just added some of these controls and they could just thrown it in the store. And if you go, and it kind of matters because in the store, if you go look at Disney Plus, you can see it's for Xbox only, but the reviews are all there. And I didn't have checked since, but all the reviews were negative because they weren't reviewing the Xbox version. You're like, why isn't this on Windows 10? And that's where people want to download it. And Disney could have done that, and they didn't. And that's really frustrating because you and I can run it on our PC because we basically hacked it off. But why couldn't just Disney do that? I don't know how they solve this problem without forcing developers to basically do it.
Well, I think the problem is that just nobody uses Windows devices to watch content like that. They use their phones if they're on the go, or they use an iPad, or their Xbox. Yeah. Their actual TV at home. They're not watching on a laptop / like a Windows device is. I think it's a very niche market these days. Windows isn't used for everything no more. PCs aren't used for everything anymore. PCs are used for work for the most part. If you're doing consumption-based stuff, you're doing it on a phone or a tablet.
So, and I agree with that 100%. It backs up what I heard from a developer who just said basically they weren't using this app. And I get that. That said, there's this weird contradiction going on in Microsoft right now, which is they're kind of getting back into mobile, right? Yeah. We're seeing a push into Windows 10 and ARM, a bigger one. You'll see more of that in the coming weeks. They have the Surface Pro X out there, LTE, always on. Basically, it's an iPad Pro that runs Windows. Let's call it that. You have Surface Go, which not a great device in terms of performance, but I think we'll see a Surface Go 2. I predict July, August next year. I say we start to hear more of a Surface Go 2. And this will tie into some other news that's coming out. But like, so we're getting back. So it's a chicken egg kind of thing, right? Like, you're right. People don't use these devices like that. But then Microsoft is kind of getting into that area again with Surface Neo, Surface Go, Surface Pro X. They want their partners to create these kind of devices. And so, like, but how can those devices be successful if you can't do these things on them? Even though the apps are so close. Like, mind you, we're not talking about companies not using UWP. They are. HBO is UWP. Showtime is UWP. Like, those apps are there. They're not just they got 95% of it done. They're just not doing that extra 5% and just listing it in the store. So, like, I don't know. I get people aren't using them a lot, but I almost don't see, like, why can't I just have it? Like, and I think part of it's just contracts. I think when companies make a contract for an Xbox app, they're like, well, we can do the Xbox app. We can throw in a Windows 10 version for support too. It'll be an extra 20,000. Like, I'm sure none of these developers that work for HBO and Showtime are like, oh, we'll just make you the Windows 10 version for free, because
Yeah.
there's a little extra level support there. And so I'm sure that's what it comes down to. Just it's money, but still, it's annoying.
Yeah.
But luckily, you don't have to worry about Disney Plus.
Yeah, because it's not available in the UK and it won't be for another like 4 months. How stupid is that?
Yeah.
Thanks, Sky. It turns out it's probably because of Sky Broadcasting. B Sky B, the same people who made Microsoft change the name SkyDrive to OneDrive. Yeah, they're stopping Disney from launching Disney Plus in the UK and elsewhere in Europe because Sky sucks.
It's all a scam. Just
Yeah.
before we went on this podcast, Hulu notified all of us that our Hulu accounts are going up by $10 next month. And mind you, it already went up $5 a few months ago. So that I think we're up like $15 to $17 uh, just this year for Hulu live TV. And they kind of made a deal. So if you have Hulu and you get a ESPN Plus, you can get Disney Plus. They give you a discount. So I was actually going to get back a couple of dollars every month. So it's actually like a deal. But now it's all wiped out because they're jacking up the whole thing by $10. The whole thing's a scam. It's all everything's just is nonsense. We're all just slaves to the stuff. It's really unfortunate. But yeah, so some people mentioning that they followed my steps. Yeah, so if you haven't really tried this yet, go get the new Edge browser. It doesn't matter if it's Canary, Dev, Beta, or the release candidate one that comes out. Go get either one of them, and all you do is just go to any website you want to, and then you go to the little triple dots, the menu, and when you scroll down, you'll see a big thing that says apps. And whatever website you're on, you'll see the first choice says, it's actually the second one, says install this site as an app. You could do it for any site. Some sites are better optimized. Basically anything Google. Like, you can go do this with Google Maps or Google Photos, and it's really cool. It's going to create basically a mobile version of that. And if you have like something with LTE on board, you can now use Google Maps and all this kind of stuff with the locations. But you'll be surprised about how well this stuff runs. You just pin it to your start menu, you can pin it to your taskbar. It's a really clever solution to this, and I hope Microsoft goes down this route. I think it's one way to solve these kind of problems. I was talking with Disney Plus, but I don't know. We'll see.
Should we talk about Microsoft's favorite assistant, Cortana?
Yeah. So we did get to sit down with Andrew Schumann, who's the in charge of Cortana, and we always get have good conversations with them, mostly because you and I are both follow Cortana. We're supporters of Cortana. We also agree, though, Cortana has had some ever since Windows Phone started dying right after 2015, basically. Uh, Cortana's and now Windows Phone's gone. Like, how do you save Cortana? You know, and because you don't have phones anymore, which is kind of the primary thing. So for a while they pursued this home market. It was kind of a half effort, right? The Invoke speaker is an amazing speaker, but it was too little, too late. Um, and they basically missed that. Then you had the thermostat, which was always kind of a weird thing. Like, listen, everybody's into that stuff, but like, stuff's goofy. I've always joked around my light switch has Ecobee in it. My Ecobee switch has Alexa in it. It's like the dumbest thing I've ever seen. Like, if you're talking to your light switch, like, I need to know something right now. It's weird, right? So all this stuff isn't brilliant, but they've been definitely trying to figure out a way to make Cortana relevant again. And we've seen leadership changes, and I feel like Schumann kind of came in and was like, "Listen, I have some ideas how we can do this that previous leadership over Cortana. And once they pulled it out of research from Cortana, went under Office, things changed there too. And so we get along with Schumann mostly because I think you and I are both in agreement that what they're trying to do with Cortana now is probably, they don't have a lot of choices, but this is probably
Mm-hmm.
the smartest choice. And that is they're weaving it right now through Outlook Mobile, starting with iOS, being Android too. And it's this clever idea that we showed over 11 months ago, where basically Cortana will read you back your priority emails, and it does it over Bluetooth and speakers and all this. And the idea here is like when you're going to work, you go into your car, you connect it to Bluetooth, like you can just go and hit the play button, and this thing will read you your emails. And I know that sounds trivial. This isn't though speech to text, which we've had forever, right? Or sorry, text to speech. This is way more sophisticated because this is using machine learning. It actually, the way I can best describe it is it's not like a machine reading back your email. It's like if you gave someone your phone and like you pretended you couldn't see and you're like, listen, I can't see what's on there. Can you just read me my emails? And it's like that experience. Someone's assuming you can't see what's going on there, but they give you context. So for instance, Cortana will be like, well, you have four new emails. This first one's pretty long. It comes from John Smith. There's a couple attachments to it in media, which you'll probably want to look at later. And then it goes through and it'll read you back the email, but just the core important parts and skips over things that like don't translate well.
Yeah.
And
So,
then
so for
ask it.
example, a good example they provided was it will
Yep,
skip over weird formatting and weird
yep,
there's some spelling mistakes and stuff. So like in an email, for especially if it's like a HTML email, there'll be lots of formatting where like there's images that are centered and whatnot. And the Cortana won't read that. It will skip all of that formatting and just go straight to the meat of the email, the words that you would read normally, which I think is really cool.
yeah. And that's where this is like machine learning and it's programmed. And they also changed the it's still Jen Taylor's voice for Cortana. There's also a male voice now as an option, but they've used like a technique where they can adjust their intonation. So it sounds way more natural too. It's not like a robot reading it back. And so I used it at the gym last night. Like this is where I use. I'll go on the treadmill. I just hit play and it just plays through my emails. And it's super smart and clever because of the quality of it. The way I can best describe it, it's like if someone made a podcast of your emails. That's exactly what it sounds like. And that was part of their They had two inspirations. One was podcasting, and it really sounds like someone like you just gave it to a podcaster, but just read me my emails like in a cool tone and just nice chill pace. And after each email, you can respond or flag it or delete it. And if the email's threaded, it'll actually read through the thread, but it'll do pauses and tell you where the thread starts and all that. So that was one inspiration. The other inspiration was uh, sight learning apps for basically people with learning, sight disabilities. And so they actually like would wear goggles where they couldn't see, and and that's where that angle comes in. And so I think this is kind of really clever, right? Because and Schumann's theory on this was that like, listen, it's an assistant. It's supposed to be helping you with things. And we see from our interaction models that like people on iOS and Android are who have Outlook are in Outlook a lot every day. They're going in and out of it to check their calendars, to check their emails, to respond. It has that is he said basically the hub for a lot of people for our Microsoft products is there. So it actually makes sense, he says, for them to have an assistant there versus say a Cortana app because they're always going into Outlook. He says we have like hundreds of thousands of and millions of users using this every day. And they're like, so why don't we put Cortana in there and help it to actually do things? So another new feature I thought was really smart. And this is only for companies. This isn't for individuals yet. But say Zach and I want to, we're in a big company. I want to email Zach. Hey, Zach, we should really meet up sometime next Wednesday, maybe to talk about that project. So I can email Zach with that proposal. I can actually CC Cortana onto that email, which is so weird. And then Cortana is going to look at both our calendars because we're part of the same org and then propose free times that we can both meet up. And then in that email, they have actionable items in the email itself, like little buttons, and you could just hit, yes, that works and all that. And then boom, it goes both to our calendars and that's it. So this is an example of machine learning and AI actually going out and doing a task for you. No more is it like, hey, Cortana, how deep is the Grand Canyon? It's not like that. It's the AI going out and doing a task for you. Now
It's
that
acting
person,
like an assistant, as
right,
one would
right.
expect one to.
Now if Zach wasn't in my company, it also works. So what happens is Zach could respond like, well, I'm free next Wednesday at 4 p.m. and 8 p.m. and all this. And Cortana will see that and still can do the scheduling, right? Because it can actually parse natural language and
Mhm.
figure that out. There's also another feature that's coming that's basically, again, going with the model that people are opening Outlook multiple times a day. When you would open it in the morning, it would basically give you the top thing will be a summary, and you click it,
Yeah, a
and it
daily
gives you
brief. That's what they call it.
yeah, a daily brief. Yeah, and it gives you priority emails you need to respond to, thing like calendar events, meetings, and it gives you basically little reminders of stuff like, hey, you said you'd email John back, you haven't done that. This looks like it needs attention. Can you make this appointment? And there was even a thing where you can like schedule yourself like downtime. So it looks at your schedule and be like, hey, from 1 to 2 p.m. today, you have a break. Would you like to have some downtime? And you hit that, and it'll schedule it for you. And so again, it's like Schumann's theory on this is basically that, listen, in real life, you have real like experts around you who take care of things.
Hmm.
And that's the way AI should be too, that you should have these kind of like little experts solving these problems for you. I realize for some people this sounds boring, but if you really think about like what AI should be doing in machine learning, it should be about solving these like little annoying tasks that you have to do every day. I dread having to go through my email. Like it's really annoying having to respond to stuff. Having an assistant being like, hey, you really should respond to this email, like I think is really awesome. I feel like these are the real world problems. It's not HAL in a spaceship. I realize that's what people want, or maybe some smart speaker that can play you Spotify. Like, okay, that's kind of cool, but this is the nitty gritty of where like AI, I think, is really has a lot of potential, and that's Microsoft's strength, right? Their strength is their services, Office 365, Microsoft 365, OneDrive, To Do, Skype, all these things, and having AI machine learning there, I think, is smart. But do you want to share some of the news about like what we also expect with the Cortana apps and what's going to happen in the
Yeah,
future?
so this is more treading into rumor speculation at this point. This wasn't stuff we talked about at Ignite specifically, but with Cortana moving into being more of a productivity assistant, we can expect to start seeing Cortana fade away from being like a dedicated assistant that competes alongside the Google Assistant, Siri, and Alexa. So, for example, things like the dedicated Cortana app on Android and iOS. Although I don't know if they're going to be going away, they are definitely being de-emphasized. Like, for example, the new Surface earbuds and the Surface headphones as well. When the earbuds launch, there'll be a dedicated Surface headphones app that users can download to set up the Surface headphones. No, meaning that users will no longer have to go through Cortana to set up the headphones like they do currently, which is kind of weird to begin with. And all it will be now is the earbuds will still support Cortana. There'll just be an option within the new audio app where you can enable Cortana that way. And my
Yeah, I keep hearing it.
invoke keeps going crazy. Regarding the Microsoft launch, because the Microsoft Assistant is in there as well, we heard that Microsoft may be planning to pull the Cortana integration out of the Microsoft launcher for those outside of the United States. That wasn't clear at first, but it did. We got it clarified after the fact. Those inside the United States, I don't think have anything to worry about right now. But those outside of the United States, you should expect to see Cortana disappear from the Microsoft launcher at some point, which is a real shame. But I assume if you just go into settings and turn your Microsoft launcher to US, it will come back.
To be fair again to Microsoft, as someone in the United States, someone who actually uses Cortana, someone who has Android phones, someone who uses Microsoft Launcher. I never use Cortana on Microsoft Launcher.
Yeah, right.
I
Yeah,
like,
I don't think many people do, honestly.
yeah. And so like I imagine again, they definitely see those numbers. And if I'm not using it, like
No one's using it.
yeah, like I mean, like I know I don't. There's a lot of things I don't play Pokemon either or Minecraft, so I'm not exactly a representative of all people. But yeah, I mean, come on, like I feel like yeah, they need to be smart. Same thing with like the setting up the headphones in the Cortana app. I get they kind of shoehorned onto there, and it was kind of an interesting thing, but it was always weird. It's
Mm.
weird to go into
Hmm.
Cortana,
Yep, I
go through
agree.
the menu systems. and to do that there. So I think the idea, like what's going to be like, is if you ever use like Bose
Yep,
headphones,
that's exactly
it,
right.
it's a the Bose headphone app is really basic. Like you launch it, it pairs up, it gives you battery life, allows you to do firmware updates, and that's kind of about it, right? That's what this app is going to basically be like. You'll have your EQ and all that kind of stuff, but you'll basically launch it once, set it up, and you probably won't go back into it again. And I think that makes a little bit more sense because it's weird if you bought Surface headphones and you go to your iPhone and you're like, all right, I want to connect this thing up, and it's like, where's the app? It's like,
Mm,
oh, you have to download Cortana, but why not Surface headphones? Like, I don't
yeah.
know. So I feel like they're being smart about this, but you're right. So this means they're pulling back in some areas. Um, Someone brought up Windows 10. No specific news around there except the stuff that has been announced, the conversational stuff we talked about a build earlier this year is still coming.
Yeah.
Coming. We did see some. We can't go into detail. Windows 10 Cortana is still definitely a thing. There's a lot of work being done on there, and you will see more on that coming in 2020. That's not. I know people are expecting like Microsoft to be like, oh, and you know, we've been fighting this ever since you broke the news about them pulling Cortana out from making an app. Everybody's like, oh, there we go, they're going to kill it now, but they're definitely not going to kill it. They definitely see Cortana on Windows 10 as playing a bigger role,
Yeah,
mostly because they control everything on there.
and not only that, Windows still needs a default assistant. It's like sure that they may eventually open it up so users can install third-party assistants and set that as default if they want, just like you can on Android. But Windows still needs a default assistant, and it still needs a default assistant experience, and that's what we're seeing in 20H1 with the new UI and the conversational view and whatnot. So that's why that's happening. That's why they're building an app for Windows 10. And over time, it will tap into all of these new Cortana experiences that they're introducing in Outlook and stuff. So I have a feeling that at some point in the future, you won't actually have to open Outlook to do the Play My Emails thing. You just launch Cortana from the taskbar and say, hey, play my emails, and it will do just that. So that's
Yeah.
kind of how that's how Cortana is going to continue existing on Windows 10. And I mean, it will still be around on mobile as well, inside apps, and maybe through the dedicated apps, and through Microsoft Launcher if you're in the US as well.
Um, I'd also, going back to this idea of a multi AI world, in Microsoft's philosophy. Now you can be like, well, Microsoft has to believe in this multi AI world because they're not like the
Yeah.
top, But I still think, despite that, it's still the rational choice. So we talked about this interoperability consortium that's working with Amazon and Verizon and Qualcomm, and I think Sony and all these other companies are kind of involved. This idea that they're working to collaborate, get their AI to work together. The Amazon Microsoft thing was like the test run of that, and now it's kind of going bigger. I still think this makes sense because Microsoft's like, listen, we're not an e-commerce company. We can never compete with Amazon for what they're doing with Alexa in that sense. But just like that, Amazon, who they do have an Alexa for businesses, but I mean, when's the last time you heard about that, right?
Yeah.
Amazon's Alexa probably will never be in the same company that has Microsoft 365. And so this idea that like Microsoft is totally seeing that like Alexa and eventually other services that it can tap into will take over all this smart home IoT stuff. They didn't say this stuff was going away, but it's clearly not a priority for them. So I wouldn't expect to see like way more smart home and IoT stuff coming to Cortana in the future. They did tell us how the Invoke speaker is sticking around in terms of support. It won't stop working. It's going to continue using and stuff. But I think their goal is like eventually your Cortana will just be your Alexa too on your PC and can do your smart home things. As someone who has a new home and some smart home stuff, I still don't find this stuff tremendously useful. What I have noticed is I have about 6 apps that control random stuff in my house, which is super annoying. Um, so I feel like this stuff is still early days for this. Like no one's really kind of figured this out. I do think the solution to that is sort of like Z-Wave. If you don't know smart home stuff, there's 2 ways of doing it. You can buy the stuff that like companies have their own proprietary connection and everything kind of works pretty well actually. And they have Z-Wave, which is open source. Z-Wave is sort of it's a open source kind of protocol that devices can use. And what's cool about that is you can make generic apps that can then control all Z-Wave products. There's a few of these even on the Microsoft Store. Z-Wave's kind of an interesting way to solve these problems, but I think we need more of that specifically for these AIs and assistants because Yeah, I don't see, and I know Google's like the top one, but Google won't be an enterprise. Like Google's not going to be in your Outlook client ever. Like it's just not going to happen. And the reason for that, we didn't even talk about this. One of the biggest things that Microsoft's done with Cortana is it's compliant with internal corporate and enterprise uh, uh, rules, basically for managing data. That what that means is like stuff is secure and it's not being leaked out, and it meets with those compliances that a lot of companies have for management of data, which is what you would expect actually from a Microsoft product because that's what they do in enterprise, right? That's why companies trust their stuff. So that's sort of the selling point here is that like you're telling Cortana all these, giving you access to your email, making appointments, but all that information is very much siloed and protected. And that's something that Microsoft can guarantee, which is why they can't guarantee that with like Google, for instance. Um, I don't know. It's an interesting debate. Like, I still feel like this stuff is very early days, but they at least have, I wrote this article is basically saying that Cortana is basically got a job, right? I feel like Cortana in 2014 to 15, when it was first coming out, it's like this baby. It's like, oh, cool, look at the tricks it can do, right? Like, and it did some cool stuff on Windows Phone, and it was definitely fast, which is neat. But I feel like now it's like now we're getting to adulthood, right? And if you're a teenager, you're like, I'm gonna be an astronaut. I'm gonna do all these cool jobs. And half of majority of people in their 30s and 40s are like wear a tie. They get up every day. They just go to work. It doesn't inspire them, right? It's a means to an end. I feel like we're kind of entering that stage now for this kind of AI stuff. Like I know Cortana reading your emails or scheduling appointments for you doesn't sound like an exciting future, but that's sort of like I said, the nitty gritty of like where this technology actually probably will make a big difference, right? And so I don't know, we'll see. But they're not changing the name.
Yeah.
Microsoft. Zach asked this question, like would they call it like Microsoft Assistant or something like that, which seems like a very Microsoft thing. He says no. Schumann said they're going to keep the name Cortana. They're keeping Jen Taylor's voice. They're going to use it in that sense where it makes sense. For instance, this feature I was talking about with Outlook, reading your emails, the Cortana rings come on the screen, full screen. It's Jen Taylor reading it. Like there, it makes sense. Other times, you're still going to see Microsoft AI machine learning in PowerPoint when you assemble slides. That's the same technology that underlies Cortana. It's just not called Cortana there. It doesn't have like a presence. It's just something that runs in the background. So some things you'll see machine learning and AI working. Sometimes it'll have a name, sometimes it won't. But Microsoft is keeping Cortana. They're going to keep an agent around for these purposes. Zach brought up a really good point, which is you need to call it something, So when you're in
Mm.
Outlook, someone brought up, I thought it was a really good idea too, that the Hey Cortana thing should actually be an Outlook because I don't think it is right now. So like I should be able to open my Outlook mobile app and be like, Hey Cortana, read me my emails, and it
Yeah,
should be able
that'd
to
be
do
cool.
that.
Yeah. Maybe
That
that'll come
makes
in the
more sense.
future. Yeah,
Right.
because if you're in a car, for example, well, the problem, well, I guess it wouldn't be a problem because if you're in a car and your hands free, you'd be like, "Hey, Google or whatever, open Outlook." Then, "Hey, Cortana, read my emails," and then that would work how you would expect
Yeah.
it to. But yeah, no, that's not in there right now, unfortunately. Talking now.
Yeah.
Yeah, she's gonna keep talking. Anyway, is that everything with Cortana?
Yes, it is.
Okay, cool.
So, all right, we're getting a little, I know I'm ranting a lot here on this podcast. So let's talk about Surface Pro X. It's here.
Do
It's in
you
front of me.
like it, Dan? Yes or no?
I do. I do like it a lot.
Good. It's very
My
fingerprinty.
reviews,
That's why I don't want one.
it is. So I definitely going to put a D brand. Actually, we're not sponsored by them, but they do have pre-orders for their skins for the Surface Pro X, which is cool. I'm definitely doing that on here because it is a fingerprint magnet. So let's talk about Surface Pro X. A lot of reviews already came out. We finally got our review unit. This is the 16 gig version, 256 gigs of storage. It's not cheap, but it's such a weird device to talk about, right? So for the right person, this is the perfect laptop. And I mean, that's me. That's me. That's Rich Woods. That's Brad Sams from Thurrott. Like for certain demographics of people, this is the computer we want and we need for our jobs. That doesn't mean it's a Surface Pro 7. Like there's a reason why the Surface Pro 7 exists, and they
Yeah.
didn't replace, one. Um, this device is good for, I think, for students. It's good for real estate people. It's good for writers. It's good for people who need to take notes, business people, road warriors, what are called nomadic workers, people who are sort of self-starters doing their own businesses and stuff like that. People who always need connected 4G LTE. It's for that. It's the same group who are buying Chromebooks, the high-end Chromebooks too, or the people who are torturing themselves to make an iPad Pro as their main PC. It's that same kind of group. And if you're not part of that, that's totally fine. Like, don't shoehorn yourself into buying this thing because you just like the way it looks. You should buy this like a tool. Like, just if you went to Home Depot and you go down that tool aisle and you see sometimes a tool and you're like, damn, that thing is really awesome. This is me, by the way. I don't even know what it does. I don't even know what it's called. I'm like, I kind of want that thing. I don't know what it does. But don't buy a tool just because it looks cool. Buy it because you know exactly what you're going to use it for. And that's what makes this device difficult. Is it's not. I think when people talk about Windows PCs, we're so used to this idea of like that they can do everything. Like at some level, a PC can do everything, right? Like I have these little tiny. I've showed on the podcast before. These little mini PCs that flip open with the little keyboards and stuff like that. Like technically, I can install Doom on them. I can install Visual Studio on them, and they technically run. They don't run well, but they technically run. And so we always get into this weird thing with PCs where we think of them as general computing devices versus specific task function things. But we're getting more of that. Surface Hub 2. How many of you have seen Surface Hub 2 and think that thing is awesome and would love to have one? Or HoloLens 2. You think the same thing. And Zach and I are here to tell you, as cool as it would be to own one of those, you probably wouldn't use it very often because it's not meant for the things you kind of think it's going to be useful at. And that's where the Surface Pro X is. It's a very specific device for a specific demographic of people. And you can use the word niche, and that's fine. But for someone like myself, this is the device I've been waiting for. Now let's get to the specifics. Obviously, it runs the Qualcomm Snapdragon. It's an 8CX, but it's clocked higher to 3 gigahertz, so it's called the SQ1, which we think stands for Surface Qualcomm chip. It has a Adreno 680 GPU. It's very fast. Here's the thing. When you actually benchmark this and it runs like ARM64, this thing can actually be a Core i5, 8th generation Core i5 processor, even for graphics. Like it's a powerful device. The key there, of course, is you want to maximize it. You want to run ARM64 or UWP apps. And that's where, of course, this gets a little, dicey for some people. Because a lot of the reviews, the people went and just installed Chrome. Chrome will run. Chrome runs pretty well on it. But Chrome will also use more battery life because you run that emulator. And that's goes back to that earlier complaint about Edge and having it for ARM64. But the performance is very good. And if you stick to those apps, the ARM64 apps and UWP apps, the battery life is going to be around 10 hours of that's real world usage. If you just use Chrome and x86 apps, you'll go down to 6 or 7 hours, which isn't amazing. It is better than the Surface Pro 7, though. I get around, it's about 20 to 30% better battery life, depending on what you're running, than a Surface Pro 7. So you do get that. Plus, you get the 4G LTE, which works very well. It uses NanoSIM. It also has eSIM on there, so you can just sign up for an eSIM plan, which is kind of clever. It does work on any network. It's not SIM locked. It's not region locked. You can just throw in any SIM. It has a world radio in it. The RAM is DDR4X. It's very good performance. They do have a real SSD in there for the first time. This is a big change for ARM. ARM before we get around 800 megabytes per second read, 200 for write. Now I'm getting 2,000 for read, and I think around 800 for writes, which is a huge improvement. That SSD is also user upgradable. I did a video on my Instagram this week. You just do a little pin, it comes off a single screw. It's a 2230 size SSD. It is standard. It's not proprietary. I realize it's not common, but it's not proprietary. You can go on eBay and buy a new one. So you could buy a 128 gig version of this device and upgrade it to 500 gigs yourself. You just have to, get the install files for Windows and go down that, which is not hard, but it's not easy. But it's definitely doable. The keyboard is excellent. The audio is really good. The audio is different. So the audio are two front-facing speakers. They're very good. They sound very much like iPhone and iPad speakers to me, which to me always have this weird sort of digital effect to them that I always seem to notice. I don't know. It always sounds weird to me, but they're good speakers. They're very good. They just sound different from the Pros and the Surface Book and laptops and stuff like that. Display is very good. It's 450 nits of brightness, very good color contrast, enhanced and sRGB modes. It is 13 inches versus the 12.3 inch, so it's a slightly bigger screen. The pen is very good. It's the same pen as Surface Pro pen. It's just flat and charges, but that design is super clever because I'm always have my pen with me. I'm not a huge pen user, but one of those people like I like having the pen. This is an awesome device for that because I always have it with me, but I don't feel like I'm carrying a pen with me. But it's actually very comfortable to use. It's very much like a carpenter's pencil if you've ever seen one of those. That's where they get that design from. It's actually kind of neat. But no, it's got two USB-C ports, Type-C 3.1 Gen 2. So these can do dual 4K 60 hertz displays. You can recharge to them. No headphone jack, no micro SD slot. That's a bummer. But you know they do have earbuds coming out that will run that. So you know, what do I do with these? You know, so this is my daily workload on the PC. This is why I'm happy with it. And this is why I can be critical of this device, but at the same time, it's like, there's two ways of doing this. When you review a laptop, if I reviewed a laptop and said, this is the best laptop in the world, everybody should have this, it's just awesome. And then secretly, I thought it was trash, I would never use it. Like, you would think most people would call that being a hypocrite, right? They'd be like, why? You don't use the thing. Why'd you say all that if you won't use it, right? Well, likewise, I can't be like, this is a terrible device. You should not buy it. Meanwhile, I'm using it all the time as my main device. That's the weird situation I'm in. So this is what I do on PCs and why I like using it. I run Microsoft Office, Word, and Excel. I run Microsoft Edge, the new Chromium browser, right? I run Twitter, Slack, Microsoft Teams, Hulu, Netflix, Disney Plus, Outlook, Polar Photo Editor Pro for editing photos, Microsoft News, GroupMe, Microsoft To Do, Skype, and MyTube for watching YouTube. If I want to do Discord, I can use mobile Discord PTB. It's an app on the store. And there's also a free version of Telegram called Unigram, which is ARM64. That covers me for 98% of what I do on a PC. Now, I don't game on PCs, not often. When I'm home, I will. But Zach knows I always like travel around with laptops. I always bring an Xbox controller. Zach, when's the last time you actually saw me gaming in a hotel room?
Never.
Yeah, it's always like, I always want to, but I just don't. I do have a Switch, which I recommend getting a Switch Lite. Like, if you want a game, just get a Switch Lite. Just call it a day. I don't know. But don't buy this for gaming. It's not good at gaming. That said, we all know Project X Cloud just announced this week, definitely coming to PC early 2020. I've already heard internally this runs xCloud just fine and actually works very well on it. So that's one way you can do gaming on this thing. But that's what I do with my PCs. I work on them. I write. I use Office. I use the web. For me, this thing's great.
So you're saying you use your PC for productivity-based tasks?
Yes, exactly.
So the Surface Pro is a good productivity. That's what the Pro stands for. It's for productivity.
Yeah, productivity. Yeah, and what I don't do is I don't edit video. Like I'm amazed at all these people who edit video on devices. I'm like, what? Like, who are all you people? Are you guys just all on YouTube?
So I have a feeling the reason a lot of reviewers did that is because the Pro 7 can edit videos and it does it kind of well. I mean, it's not. I wouldn't buy it as my number one video editing machine, but if you need to edit a video in a pinch, the Pro 7 can do it. The Pro X kind of can't do it because it doesn't have the ARM64 apps compiled.
There's a couple apps that do. I list them in the review that'll be out. Someone brings up the question is, are you compromising the way you use your PC in order to use an ARM device or not? Definitely not. And here's the deal. I have more laptops in front of me right now than most of you will see in your entire life.
You should share that picture you put in our group me of your cleaned office.
Yeah, that was, geez. Yeah, I had to clean my office this week because, again, it looked like Best Buy exploded. I have my choice of any laptop I could use.
Yeah.
So the idea that I would force myself to use the Pro X over, say, another device is absurd because it's just like, I have 3 cell phones with different lines, so tethering is not an issue. Like, I can do all of this. No, I use this device because that's all I use on. That's what everything I just listed is what I do on a PC because I work on a PC. I don't edit videos. Uh, I do edit photos on occasion, but even there, like I use my main desktop rig when I need to do that. Um, that's what I use PCs for. So no, I'm not compromising anything. If there was, but I get it. And this was like the Verge's review too, was like, Dieter Bohn was like, I need to use Lightroom. I can't use Adobe
Yeah.
Lightroom on this.
Hmm.
And I get that. But that's not this device. This device wasn't meant to really run Lightroom, I would say.
I think the problem that Microsoft has sort of put themselves in here with the Pro X is that they called it a Surface Pro.
Yeah,
This device should just be called the Surface X, in my opinion. It should be a sort of staple, like, here's the future of Surface. We're not calling it a Pro, we're not calling it a laptop, we're not calling it the book. It's Surface X. This is where we want to go with Surface going
yeah,
forward. And that way, I think that would have tempered expectations a little bit. In that, oh, it's an ARM device. It's not a Pro device, it's a Surface X. And that would have been a kind of cool, COOL, callback to the Surface RT and Surface 2. You'd have Surface RT and then Surface 2, which were both ARM devices, and then Surface X. You know, like we're now a few years later, the ARM has matured. We're doing this again. We have the Win32 emulation, or the x86 emulation. Sorry, you can run most of your programs, and like Dan mentioned, most Win32, most x86 programs run fine. Chrome runs basically fine. The only problem with it is that it eats up battery life, because the benefit
yeah.
of ARM at 64 is that they're great on the battery life. But if you're running the emulation layer, then all those benefits disappear, and you go back to using 4 hours of screen on time and whatnot. But if everything was ARM64 compiled, then you'd be getting 7, 8, 9 hours. Now, it's definitely not the
Right.
13 hours people have been Microsoft has said it gets, but that's usually the case, right? Because usually those tests are based on some really silly thing that no one's ever going to be using to begin with.
Yeah. I mean, and to be fair, like when these ARM devices first came out, I was going back to the old stuff. They were like promising a week's
Yeah,
worth of battery. And there were two reasons for that. One was the Snapdragon 835 was just a slower chip,
yeah,
which everybody complained about. But even I use the Snapdragon 835. Everybody knows I use the HP NVX2 for a long time. I love that device. I still have it here right next to me. Um, so but they would also, a lot of times, it would create laptops that basically had a bigger battery in them. Microsoft this time definitely made this thing this slim, and it is. It feels really nice to hold. It basically feels like an iPad Pro. But it only has a 38 watt hour battery, which is kind of the same size as the Surface Pro. So the battery life is better. But like, yeah, if you were to put this in like a full size laptop, like kind of what the Samsung device is going to be, you'd get better battery life. But the battery life is better than a Pro device. Like it just is.
yeah.
It's
I
around
mean, and
20%
also,
better.
the time people are getting is screen on time, right? The benefit of the Pro X is that when you put it to sleep, it drains little to no battery life. So you can put it on charge one morning, take it off charge 100%, use it for a couple of hours, close it, not use it for 4 hours, turn it back on. It should be at the same battery life. So you can
Yeah.
get through multiple days with it if you're only using it on and off for, say, 2 hours at a time. Whereas if you're using it throughout the entire workday, it's on constantly and you're running emulation, then you're definitely not going to get through. You might have to put it on charge at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, for example.
And so I was asking, and there seems to be a lot of confusion. For ARM devices, Windows compromising anything? I mean, PC ARM has completely different architecture. No, I mean, so when this thing runs, it just runs Windows. It's Windows 10 Home. You can upgrade to Windows 10 Pro if you want to. It's just straight up Windows, and everything runs native ARM64 in Windows on this thing. So
Yes.
if you stick to UWP apps, if you stick to the New Edge browser and the Canary Ring and runs ARM64, this thing it's fast. I'm telling you. I did the benchmarks. They'll be in the review. But for actually, I can actually let me pull up some of the benchmarks here. Where is do I have the page? Give me 2 seconds. I'll
While
pull up
you're
some
pulling
benchmarks.
that up, I do want to mention as well that right now the biggest problem with ARM devices right now is that they don't run 64-bit apps, and that is, I agree, quite a big problem, because there are quite a few, especially professional apps now, that are 64-bit only. But we know
Yeah,
that support is coming. We don't know when, but Microsoft does intend to at some point release an update that has emulation support for 64-bit apps as well, and that will change the game. Now, this won't be
a
anytime
little
soon.
bit. I'm not.
Go ahead.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Now, I was going to say I'm not. All this emulation stuff, the 32-bit, and now we're hearing 64-bits coming, are nice fallbacks. And the beauty of the
Yes.
64-bit is you'll get more RAM access and all this,
Yeah.
which
Yeah.
is cool. But I don't think, but the kind of apps that you're talking about, like still emulating an ARM six, or sorry, a 64-bit x86 app, you're still not going to get the performance you want. The real solution is recompiling for ARM 64. So I feel
Yeah,
like,
and that should be something Microsoft is pushing more than they are currently. In my opinion, I don't think they're doing enough to convince developers to get them compiling for ARM 64. But that 64-bit fallback will be very important to a lot of people, I think,
yeah,
when that's eventually
yeah,
made available.
yeah. Like it's nice to have, but I still feel like it's just like I feel like a lot of the so Microsoft says that 95% apps are still 32-bit that people are going to use on this class of device. And this is where it gets into the thing where like because it's a PC, people want to do like people like I've seen want to do crazy things on the Pro X. So like can I edit 4K video? Like
No.
you should not buy this thing to edit 4K video. Like there are other devices out there that are way better for doing that kind of stuff, right?
Do we know if the iPad Pro can edit 4K video? Because if the iPad Pro can, then I can see why people would attempt that on the Pro X.
I think you kind of can, but like I think there's still limits there.
Yeah, like
A
definitely
friend,
because that's just because Qualcomm's behind when it comes to silicon and
but
the ARM
also there's
space.
a was it Final Cut Pro is not on an iPad, right? So
No,
it's
yeah,
like
it's Final. What is it? iMovie on iPad or something? I think it's
something like
iMovie.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's like even there on the iPad Pro, you're still not running the same Pro apps you'd run on the Mac. So it's like I don't know. It gets, but look at some benchmarks here. So this is really interesting. So looking at Geekbench 4, which is nice because Geekbench 4 allows you to do uh, bench it ARM natively and get that score, which of course will be higher, but it also does x86 emulation. So you can kind of compare and contrast those. So just to put into context of how much of an improvement this has been for this new SQ1 processor versus the Snapdragon 850, which is the last one we had. So the Surface Pro X, when it's emulating x86, basically beats like a Galaxy Book 2 running ARM native.
Wow.
Yeah, so like that's how much of improvement it is, right?
Yeah,
So
that's
let me
pretty
repeat that
big.
again. So x86 on the Pro X emulation is faster than the ARM native was on the previous chip. And so when you go up to and to give you specific scores here, Surface Pro X on ARM was 3,505 single core, but had 11,727 for multi-core. It's because it's technically an 8-core processor. The Galaxy Book 2 running Snapdragon 850 only had 7,400 on the multi-core. That's a huge jump in performance. And I got to put in other things here. I got to update this yet. But yeah, SSD is a massive improvement, of course. PC Mark. I did the night raid for graphics, and that too, that more than doubled the score of the Snapdragon 850. So it's actually very performant. But I don't know. Like I said, if you want a game, if you want to do video editing, like get the Surface Pro 7. That's why it exists. If you're like me though, and again, I can read off what I do on this. I don't want to beat a dead horse, but I do Microsoft Office, Edge, Twitter, Slack, Teams, Hulu, Netflix, Polar Photo Video Editor or Photo Editor, Microsoft News, GroupMe, To Do, Skype, MyTube, and some Discord. Like that's what I use my PC for. That's 95% of it. But if you need to do other stuff, then go get a different device. That's all I can tell you.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I like it. I'm glad they did this device. It's just but you're right. The messaging would have been better if they called it Surface X Pro X. I think it would have helped, but I also feel like some of the reviews would have still said the same.
I just feel like setting expectations is important when it comes to a device like this, and calling it Surface Pro makes a lot of people believe that it's a new Surface Pro. Where it very much, I don't think it's fair to call it a Surface Pro. I think this is a sidestep from the Surface Pro. This is a new sort of path for Surface using ARM and sort of lightweight mobile computing compared to the sort of almost heavyweight computing that the Surface Pro 7 can do. I'm not saying it's the most powerful tablet in the world. I mean, it's not got a dedicated graphics card in it, so you wouldn't be using it for super creative tasks anyway, but it can do, like a lot of people use the Surface Pro for app development and whatnot. The Pro X probably isn't a good choice for app development, for example.
Yeah, you can run Visual Studio on it. It doesn't run great, and there are going to be limits what you can do for compiling and stuff like that, depending on the languages you're working in. But yeah, for for a certain demographic, this is a great device. Now, the question is, of course, could they have done the Pro 7 with this form factor? And yeah, they could have. It would have been thicker, it would have been a little
And I
heavier.
bet they do it next year.
And they'll do it next year, of course. They did it this year just to for the Pro X, just to so it looks nicer, so it gets a little bit more attention. The
Mm.
camera is also very good on it, by the way. It's got a 11 megapixel rear camera, which is up from I think 8 megapixel in the previous version. Really good cameras on it. It's a great device. I will say though, listen, I've been targeting Intel attention for a while. Dude, Intel did a really nice job. Here's a funny thing. Intel's 10th gen on the Surface Pro 7, its instant on ability is actually now better than ARM, which I did not see that one coming. So what I mean is it actually, when you drop that the keyboard cover, it actually turns on faster and resumes
Wow.
faster than the ARM. It also, the Surface Pro 7 like goes into like a hibernation mode, I think like after 30 hours or something like that.
Hmm.
Whereas the ARM version, I think only does it after, I don't know how many hours, but it's a lot less. So when I wake up the
Really?
next morning and I turn on the Surface Pro X, like I had to hit the power button and I'll see the little logo come on and the little
Wow, that's
spin.
kind of sucks because
Yeah.
the iPad doesn't need to do that. That kind of negates the entire reason I was into ARM to begin with.
Yep.
That's
Yeah, that's
interesting.
what I'm saying. Like Intel's really caught up with this. Is their Project Athena stuff, I think, that's really kind of paying off. So technically the Pro 7 can actually resume a little bit faster on certain tasks. That said, Pro X will get you better battery life by 20%, so
Yeah.
like that's not insignificant. I realize that's not 20 hours or whatever like that, but listen, 9 to 10 hours versus, 6 to 7 can matter for a lot of people. So, but yeah, there's room for improvements, but I'm happy with it, but
Yeah,
there's
I'm
a
gonna
lot of
be
caveats.
I'm gonna be very interested to see where Surface heads in the next 12 to 18 months. Because obviously the Surface Pro X is a Gen 1 product. I'm curious to see what a Gen 2 looks like, what it'll be running on the inside and whatnot, how they can improve it there. I'm also interested to see how the Surface product line goes forward in other areas. So the Surface Go, for example, will the Surface Go eventually fall under the ARM umbrella as well, alongside the Surface Pro X? Will that remain an Intel Pentium device? Hopefully not. Then you've also
Yeah.
got like the Surface Neo being an Intel Lakefield device. I'm assuming that will eventually become an ARM device in the future, because that device, more than any other Surface that exists right now, makes more sense as an ARM device, and I don't care what you say.
Yeah.
But yeah, like I'm very interested to see how Microsoft diverges and sort of adapts to the improvements to ARM and Intel and hopefully AMD with the Surface laptop as well.
Yeah, it would be nice. We've talked about that before with Surface Go 2, assuming that happens. It can't be the 8CX. It
No,
can't
it
be the
can't.
SQ1 because it's a clearly the price on this thing is expensive. I didn't mention that. It starts at $1,000, and then you still need the keyboard, which is another $140, which is like all Surface products. Um, and if you want the pen, it's $270 with the keyboard. It's a
Yeah,
package. So you can spend up just over 2 grand for the top of the
it's a
line,
lot
and
of
that's
money.
it is a lot of money. But again, I think this is for a lot of companies and businesses. I really think that's the thing with ARM is it's really a big play for enterprise and businesses. And I had some go like acting surprised with me on Twitter, like, does Microsoft even sell these things to companies? It's like, yeah, actually a lot. Like they literally have Surface for Business, the whole separate SKU system where
Yeah,
they sell all their Surface devices as business products. Uh, and you can go and that's how Zach got his Intel version of the Surface laptop 3 15-inch. But that is a thing. They do sell a lot. That's the only reason why the storage is removable in these new devices is because of enterprise. I get like some of you consumers, people are like, oh, cool, I can upgrade. They didn't do it for you. Like it's a side effect. They did it because businesses require that and have heavily requested it. But yeah, they do sell a lot of services for business because they get direct support through Microsoft. My friends in IT at a school here in Massachusetts, he gets massive discounts through the Surface Business Program. In fact, they're giving him a Surface Pro X for like really cheap.
oh
So
nice.
yeah, so there's actually like, yeah, they do a lot for business. I know in our audience and everybody talks about tech, it's consumer, 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 and that's how I review stuff. And I'm telling you, a lot of what Microsoft does is enterprise, enterprise, enterprise.
Oh
Like, and I,
yeah,
and I know some of you know that, but I don't think you know that. Like in the sense of like that's why a lot of these devices are created for. And Surface Pro X, I know they like to show artists and drawing on all this kind of stuff, but it's really geared ARM and all this kind of stuff. It's really aiming to solve problems in the business world. And certain what Mike and this is what Panos calls tech forward mobile workers, right? Um, that's not a lot of you, and that's fine. It's fine. You can look at the
Yeah.
Service Pro X and you can hear my limitations and you're like, that sounds stupid. I don't want it. It's going to fail. It's not for you. Let's just say that. For me, though, for Brad Sams, for Rich Woods, this is the device. And think for Zach, too, this is like the device we need. Like when I go to meetings, I can take note. Like this is actually what I need. So to tell me, so I can't say it sucks, but
Yeah. Going on that, Surfaces for Enterprise comment you just made, I think a lot of people don't realize that, like you said, like when Microsoft is looking for feedback when it comes to like future products and previous products, they talk to their enterprise customers first because
sure.
that's where the money is. That's where the people who are spending the most money on Surface reside. So it makes sense to talk to those people first because they're the ones who are spending the money. Those are the ones who are using the product in a business sort of productivity sense. And that's why when we say, Service is only really around because of the enterprise spin it can have. Don't get me wrong, Service is great, and I believe quite strong in the consumer market as well. But it's only really here because the enterprise is like it. If it wasn't, I feel like Service would have folded a long time ago, in my opinion.
Yeah, that's truth to that. And getting back to even Cortana, like they flat out said, like the reason they're doing a lot of Cortana stuff with Microsoft 365 and Office is because they're giving it to the customers who pay.
Yeah,
Those are
yeah.
that's their bread and butter. So they're trying to make their lives easier, more productive. Um, and I realize that's not the same story like
Yeah,
Apple tells. I get that, but
because you got to remember, at the end of the day, these are all companies whose number one goal is to make money. It's not about to please you and make you happy.
right,
It's about making the most money they can possibly make and pleasing the most people they can possibly please. It's
yeah,
not like it's nice to think about Microsoft as like the most ethical company, like the nicest company with the most awesome people. Yeah, but at the end of the day, it's all about the money, and I forget that quite often. It's like sometimes you got to remember that it's all about the money.
yeah. So just think of the Pro X as a specific tool. Sometimes you need a hammer, sometimes you need a screwdriver,
Mm,
sometimes you need a lathe. Like sometimes you need a specific tool, and if you don't need that tool at the moment, it doesn't mean that tool sucks. It just
yeah.
means it's just not for you, and you need something else, and that's totally fine. But you're going to see a lot more of this in the PC space, where I think you get these specialized devices that appeal to some people and don't appeal to others, and that's totally fine. I just don't make the mistake that because it's not for you and you can't do say 4K video editing on it, therefore, or you can't play your favorite video games on it, it sucks and has no use or role in this world. I don't think that's true, but we'll see how it pans out. I think it's an interesting experiment. It's a risk. This is also a chicken egg thing. They need to get this device out there. Hopefully, it gets more high profile. We see more ARM development. We see more apps come along, and that fulfills its prophecy. We know x64 support is supposedly coming now. We do know Adobe is supposed to recompile some of their apps, at least for ARM64, which I think is the real big news. But don't buy this device now if you need Photoshop and you're hoping Photoshop ARM64 is right around the corner. We don't know. I'd wait until that happens. But Adobe is big partners with Microsoft. In fact, they just announced this week how they're doing stuff with the cloud again together. So you'll definitely see that stuff happening. And that's big, right? But this is a process. As I've been saying for 2 years now, ARM is a slow burn, but it's going to grow. You're going to see more of it in the next couple of weeks. So just pay attention to that. But with that, I think we should wrap up our podcast here as we're going on 90 minutes and I'm getting tired. So
Yes, me too.
all right, let's wrap it up. So if you are listening to this recorded, we do this live every week, Friday, 2:30 p.m. Eastern time on Windows. I'm sorry, mixer.com/Windows Central. Also our YouTube channel. You can join in there. And we're going to do Q&A right now for the live session. But unfortunately for recorded, you don't get to listen to that. So join in for us for that. Follow me on Twitter or Instagram at Daniel_Rubino, Rubino, for more info there or to ask me questions. You can also follow Zach at ZACBOWDEN on Twitter. And as always, we appreciate you guys listening in, and we'll talk to you next time. Take care, everyone.
Cool. So yes, as Dan just mentioned, we're going to hang around for 10 minutes or so to answer any questions you may have. They don't have to be related to the podcast. They could be anything.
But how can an emulator can perform the native? I don't know what that means.
Good
I think what
question.
the important thing to remember with the SQ1 chip is it's so fast that even when it's emulating apps, it basically feels like a kind of like a Core i3, like an eighth gen Core i3 processor, even when it's emulating. And for a lot of people, that's going to be good enough for as a fallback, right? So,
Mm.
but it's not. I mean, ultimately, ARM64 and UWP is what runs the best on here, which is why I was want the Edge ARM64 version because it runs really, really well. In fact, someone was telling me they're like they use an ARM PC, and they're like, oh, I'm just running the regular version. It seems fine. I have no problem with that. I'm like, go try the ARM64. Like, all right. They came back like an hour. Like, you're right. Way faster, way better. I'm like, yeah. I'm like, emulation's fine, and you get used to it. It's just like you can get used to running a Surface Go, but when you run the ARM64 native, it's definitely better.
So someone's asking, will the 64-bit emulation be coming to all current devices? We don't actually know. The report from Neowin does suggest that it will, but we don't know for sure if that's going to be the case.
Yeah.
So for now, the rumor is yes. Also, will old Edge auto update to Credium? So we actually mentioned that on the podcast briefly. There's a few different ways it will happen. Either it will be pushed as an update through Windows Updates, and when it's installed automatically through there, it will just replace the old Edge with the new Edge. The other way is that it will be preloaded with a feature update in the future. So when you update from, say, version 1909 to version 2009, that version 2009 may have Edge pre-installed, and that's when you'll get it like that. So yeah, or if you're a user and you want it as soon as it's made available in the stable channel, just go and download it on January 15th, and Windows is smart enough to sort of figure out what you're doing and replace old Edge with new Edge just through the normal installer. So that's pretty nice as well.
You know what's really cool? If you had Edge Canary installed on your ARM device, it would update
Yeah,
automatically to the ARM
yeah, I
version.
read that. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. And you know this because if you go into the settings and about, it'll say a 64-bit version.
Hmm.
That's the ARM64, whereas before it was running had to run 32-bit. Someone's asking what's the difference between this is a complicated one. What's the difference between ARM64 and 64x86? Well, I mean, long story short, 64x86 is like Intel AMD. So this is, years ago we ran 32-bit apps on Intel and AMD chipsets. That was the x86 instruction set. Then 64-bit came along once we had 64-bit operating systems, which I believe started with Windows ME. It was definitely Windows NT 2000, I think was the first one. But then the kernel eventually switched over to 64-bit. That allowed higher access to more memory of your system. You can basically run 32 and 64 gig systems. That's a limitation of operating systems. If you're running 32-bit, you could only, I think, access 4 gigabytes of RAM. So that's the thing there. So that's an Intel-based system. There's not a huge advantage in terms of like 64-bit. They don't really run faster. They just can access more memory. They sometimes have a little more access to security stuff. But it's really meant for like big heavy lifting apps, CAD, video editing, photo, all this kind of stuff. I mean, you can get it with browsers too, because browsers can actually suck up a lot of RAM. So you want sometimes 64-bit. Meanwhile, ARM is a completely different architecture. It's what's on your phone. And so these are two different chipsets. And the fact that Microsoft has basically made a Windows 10 on ARM, and it's actually amazing because I'm telling you, most of you would, if I give you a Surface Pro X, most of you would be fine with it. You'd think this is just like a Core i5 processor. That's just what it feels like. It's very fast. And I don't want to, underestimate that. It's a quick system. It feels like a Surface Pro.
Mm.
And so, but yeah, so you can't run 64-bit apps. But I would argue that this thin, light device, just like if you had an Atom processor, you don't want to install like Photoshop on that either.
Do you know if recompiling x86 apps to ARM is a lot of work? It seems like it must be, question mark. So it depends on the app. Some simple
Yeah.
apps, it's just as simply you tick a box and it works on ARM64. Other apps, more complex ones, legacy ones, may take a little bit more to a lot more work to do, which is why you just don't see it happen. Like if it was simply a tick box in Visual Studio or whatever, you press one button and it's good to go, then I'm pretty sure you'd see it a lot more. But I have a feeling from in a lot of cases, there's more than just ticking a box required to make it compatible with ARM64.
The problem is something like even Adobe stuff is like when you build an app, you're not just like, there are very few kind of pure apps that
Mm.
are just like, because each app tends to be built off of separate systems and libraries. And that's how developers work. They take stuff that's like, they don't need to go, when you're making an app, they don't recreate every single part of the UI and the layer and the library system for that app. What they do is they take pieces that people have already done that are open source and on GitHub, and they mix and match those to make their app. And that's why apps can be kind of complicated. And so what happens is they may want to recompile the app, but the app's what it's built off of, some of those components aren't able to be converted to ARM64. This is a big thing with video games. A lot of video games are 64-bit because, again, they need more RAM access, so that helps. But you can make a video game and you want to recompile it, but say it's based off of something you've heard of before, Unity. Unity's a big gaming engine. Why? Because if you're making a video game, the idea that you're going to, each time someone creates a video game, they go and recreate a gaming engine for it to power the graphics would be absurd. Like it would just, you would not see video games out. So what you see a lot of video games do is they take the engine and then they build the app or the game around that. Well, you can't recompile that game if Unity, the game engine, is not compatible with ARM64. Luckily, ARM64 compatibility for Unity did happen over the summer, which means you could now take games in theory, recompile them for ARM64. But you're going to need some demand. I think that's going to take a long time. And that's also happening at a time, right, when cloud gaming is coming online. So I feel like these kind of things are going to cancel each other out. But that's why. It's complicated stuff.
Someone's asking. Oh, I've lost the question. It was a good question. Sorry. Where did it go? Why doesn't Microsoft make its own chip? It's a good question, and so I have to be careful what I say here. But I wouldn't be surprised if in the future there is an actual Microsoft-made ARM chip in a Surface. It's definitely something they want to do. It is definitely something they want to do. Whether or not it actually ever ships, I don't know.
There's two ways of thinking about this. I think people sort of conflate the two. There's designing your own chip,
yes,
or working with a company to design your own chip,
right.
And then there's making your own chip. Mm-hmm. Microsoft will never make their own chip, I don't think, because Intel makes their own chips, AMD makes their own chips. Both companies face huge problems in trying to make their own chips. Intel can't meet demand right now. They're having trouble hitting 10 nanometers. They're getting some out there in the market. They can't even get 14 nanometers. All you have to do is follow HP's news and Dell's news and Microsoft's news and even their own quarterly report saying how they were able to meet their own market demands, right? AMD has this issue too. And AMD technically doesn't make all their own chips in the sense that they design their own chips, but then they used to have to go to foundries, these separate companies that actually make the chip. And that stuff is super, super expensive. We're talking like billions of dollars to make these factories in order to hit these 7 and 10 nanometer. And it's super, like the amount of capital you need to invest to actually make your own chip versus what you see Microsoft actually doing. Let's talk about the actual reality here. What Microsoft does is they go to AMD, they'll go to Intel, and they'll go to Qualcomm, who are already doing this. And they're going to them with sometimes special requests, and they're working on them on certain designs. But at the end of the day, it's those companies that are going out and actually making this stuff and taking all the risk for them. I see zero reason why Microsoft would go and push those guys aside and be like, we're going to invest billions to make our own chips. And then what are they going to do? Push Intel and Qualcomm to the side and AMD? No way. I don't see that happening. Now, Microsoft Research has been working on their own chip. Do you remember the name of that, Zach? What the chip was called?
I do not. I believe it's based on the E2.
Yeah, right.
Though. Yeah.
So they do research with this stuff, but like I don't see. And that chip may have a very specific function for a specific device they have in mind, but you're not going to see like PCs running on stuff like that. It's just the same reason why Microsoft got to making Windows phones, and they don't like making typically their own hardware, why they wouldn't buy Fitbit, all this. It's the same thing with chips. It's just chips are very hard to make, man. All you need is a couple bad quarters and you're screwed. Even Apple technically doesn't make their own chips. They design their own chips, but they end up going to Samsung to make their own chips. So just keep that stuff in mind.
What updates do you expect on the upcoming Surface Book 3? It's a good question. Maybe we'll see a little bit more modularity like we have seen with the Laptop 3 and the Pro X. I'm not expecting a huge redesign. 10th gen will likely be the big sort of update there. Perhaps 2070 inside. The graphics
Yeah,
card we got around that. I don't know, but yeah, I'm not
I don't
expecting a
think,
huge shift in design for the Surface Book 3.
and getting back to Intel, I don't think Intel's 10th gen chips in the category that the Surface Book uses, which is different from the laptops because it's a more powerful chip. I don't think those chips are available yet.
Mm,
The 10th gen stuff, they've only announced like a quarter of the ones for the whole
interesting.
series as available. So I think it's a timing issue. It's a separate question about the redesign if they would have one.
Yeah.
Part of me thinks this they won't. I think Zach's
Me,
right. I
so
think
yeah.
they'll throw in a 10th gen and a 2070, call it a day. But who knows, right? I don't know. I don't know.
Yeah, I'll be interested to see if they can get rid of that gap in the hinge. I think that's the biggest
I
thing.
I like that gap.
I know, I don't mind. At first, I hated it. I kind of got used to it, and I don't mind it now. But I still have a feeling that they want to get rid of it.
Well, remember the number one complaints about it.
It gets dirty.
That was, if we don't know what you're talking about, that was Tom Warren when the Surface Book 1 was announced, and he had it for a little while, and he complained on Twitter about how it was in his bag and it would get dusty and dirty, and a lot of us were like, that doesn't really happen, but okay. It was just a weird criticism. It was like, okay, if that's a thing, I guess. What's on your Black Friday wish list? Unfortunately, with my job, there's nothing I desire typically for Christmas or Black Friday. That said, I threw this on Instagram today. I am reviewing right now the Razer Raptor 27. It's their first display that Razer's made. This is a review unit. I do have to send it back. In fact, I want it back like next week, I think. Um, I think this is a first display I might actually buy though, because I like it so much. It's 27-inch G-Sync adaptive sync. I'm reading the specs here. WQHD, that's 2560 by 1440, 1 millisecond response time, 144 hertz refresh, and HDR 400. It's a gorgeous display. And it glows. It has chroma lighting on it, of course. But I really like this display a lot. I like the size. I like the look of it. It has awesome cable management. So I might try to pick this one up myself. That's kind of about it, though, I think. Yeah. What about Azure Sphere? Isn't that Microsoft's own SoC? So, like, again, I mean, like, even there, I don't know if it's their own SoC. I think they designed it, but that's what I'm talking about. Like, they may make specific chips for these little things like an Azure Sphere. Don't get me wrong; it's super important for IoT devices, but that's very different than like we're going to make our own laptop chips. Like that's a whole other thing, right? You're talking volume and production, all this kind of stuff. Like Azure Sphere has way less constraints than making a PC chip, which is going to be so much more complicated. I think what the beauty of the Intel 10th Gen system is you get things like Thunderbolt 3 thrown on the chip for free, unless you're Microsoft and you disable that. You get Bluetooth 5, you get Wi-Fi 6. Like this is all on the same chip, right? It's the same size, you get it all included. It's not just you're making a fast CPU anymore. And then you got to get the GPU part. And Intel got slagged for slacking off on GPUs for years. And now the 10th Gen series is actually, Iris Plus is actually pretty significant, right? So that's what makes this stuff so hard. It's like this is like the AMD system. I slogged that one because why? It doesn't have Wi-Fi 6 built on. It doesn't get Thunderbolt 3. Meanwhile, AMD fans were like, it's the best thing in the world. But it's like it's not just the chip anymore. It's not just the CPU. It's everything else. And this is why it gets super complicated making this stuff. It's also the reason why ARM does well. They have all-in-one chips as well.
What laptops are your current daily drivers? For my laptop, I'm currently using the 15-inch Surface Laptop 3 with an Intel Core i7 and 16 gigs of RAM, and I love it. It's great.
And I'm using laptop 3 13-inch with Intel Core i5 and of course Surface Pro X. Although I saw on Ion Tech, my friend Brett House reviewed the XPS 13 2-in-1, which I've been quite vocal about saying it's one of the best laptops of the year, and he gave it a really positive review too. And then I read it, I was like, let me turn on my XPS 13. So I've been playing around with that all day today too. I really like that laptop, but that's my. I still don't have the HP Dragonfly or the new Spectre, which is a shame. I don't know when those are going to be reviewed.
If Dell made the new XPS 13 with a 3x2 screen, I would probably buy that. and use
60,
that.
yeah, but 60 by 10 is pretty darn close.
Yeah, but it's not 3 by 2.
It definitely feels dramatically different from 16 by 9,
Yeah,
I'll
yeah.
say that. But here's the thing though, I said before, the XPS 13's display crushes the
Yes, it
Surface.
does. Yeah, it really
It's
does.
over 500 nits of brightness. You get HDR, it's touch, it gets higher resolution if you want. It's just oh, and it's anti-glare. It's just an awesome, awesome display.
Right, a few more questions, and I think we're gonna head off because we've already been going for a little while.
Can we expect ray tracing for Surface Book 3? Sure. I mean, I'd be very surprised if they don't put the 2060 or 2070 in Surface Book 3. I'd be really surprised. The beauty of the 2060 and 2070 is the thermal overhead and power constraint is actually, I think, lower than the 1060 series. So that's why I've said this before. When NVIDIA announced those for laptops, it's why like they had, I think it was 50 laptops announced with the 20X, 2070, 2080, because the re-engineering needed to put those in to the current laptops was very minimal. So there's really no reason I don't see why Microsoft couldn't do that for Surface Book 3, which means that you would get ray tracing.
Someone was asking, did you buy the new Elite controller too? I did, and I like it. I don't think you did you, Dan?
I did not.
Yeah, Dan likes to just buy all the controllers, like all the
I know.
special
You
ones.
can see back there, I have the white, because I bought the white Elite controller
Yeah,
not too long ago.
yeah. The two is nice, but apparently there are some quality issues with
The
it.
issue.
So maybe don't buy one just yet. What was your biggest takeaway from Ignite? What impressed you the most? So for me personally, Project Silica was it's just super super interesting. Now this isn't a thing that's gonna be coming tomorrow or next year. This is like a long thing out, and I'm actually going to write about this next week. So if you're interested, make sure you keep an eye out on Windows Central. But what Project Silica is Microsoft is using glass, like actual glass, to store data. Now, this isn't going to be like live data. Like you won't be seeing this in place of an SSD, for example. This is like archival data. So this will be used in place of tape, for example, or like for large storage backups for enterprises and whatnot in cloud service far away. And what it does is it writes data to the glass, and it's like it uses focal points to sort of shift through the data through depth and whatnot. It's very, very interesting. Like I said, I'll do a more technical write up on it next week. I'm just sort of trying to remember it from my memory. But it's super expensive because it's super early days, and it's also very, very slow. So, for example, the piece of glass they showed me had the Windows 10 ISO on it, which is about 3.5 gigs, I believe, somewhere around 3 gigs, 4 gigs. And that took an entire night to put onto it. So it's not fast. It's very, very slow today. But they anticipate when this actually is something ready to be used commercially in 10 years or so. Like within 10 years, he said, that it will be much, much faster and whatnot. So yeah, I think it's really, really cool. It's an interesting thing because, you know, we have hard disk drives and we have SSDs and now glass, which is cool, I think.
So I was asking about this monitor again, about the G-Sync. It's G-Sync compatible, but not G-Sync or G-Sync Ultimate, which it doesn't really mean much. I don't think. It just G-Sync Ultimate has over HDR of 1,000 nits, which obviously this doesn't have. This is like, I think, 500 or 600 nits. I think it's 500 nits maybe. So it was certified with 300 tests. Yeah, it just means it's validated, no artifacts. So that's good enough for me. But I really like this display. I just think it looks awesome. And that's also to say there are probably better displays out there. I realize with Razer is just like Surface products. Like you don't buy them because they're necessarily the best on the market. It's because they're kind of the whole package is just cooler. Like I think Razer stuff looks and performs really well, but you also pay a premium. It's the same with Surface. Surface Laptop 3 to me is still one of the best laptops on the market, but you can clearly point out the laptops that perform better, have more ports, and do more things. But in terms of the overall experience, I like Razer stuff the best.
What is the next version we will be getting in the Insider program? Is it 20H2 or 21H1? This is a good question, and I have received very mixed messaging on this subject. So for now, I'm going to say I don't know, but if I had to make an educated guess, I'd say it's 21H1. But like I said, don't know that for sure. I'm not going to do a write-up on that because I don't want to be quoted for saying that. Could be 20H2. We know it's the manganese release. We just don't know if that's 20H2 or 21H1 right now. Well, we'll know within the next couple of weeks for definite because Microsoft is planning to flight the manganese builds very soon.
Did you answer this regard to PWA? Why does Microsoft feel why do you feel Microsoft hasn't proactively promoted Microsoft Maps and other apps cross-platform? I don't know. Maps is weird. I feel like that's a licensing thing too.
And also because everybody uses Google Maps.
Yeah, I
That's
feel
why
like
it's
I
no
feel
point.
like
There's no point even trying to compete.
yeah, I feel like I mean Apple has their maps, but they get the benefit of kind of shoehorning that on by default, and it
Yeah.
only works with the Apple Watch, and
And even
so
then, most people download Google Maps on iPhone. I
right,
most of my
right,
friends use Google Maps on their iPhone.
yep. So I feel like that's like a real like again like Microsoft needs to do like pick its battles where they think it can win.
Hmm.
And I don't think there's a game plan where like they can get beyond like 1% market share with
Yeah, we
maps
could be
on,
the number one maps provider. Like, I don't think that someone at Microsoft is
or
trying
even
to
number
achieve this.
two, like
Yeah, yeah,
versus like a distance like third or fourth,
yeah.
like I just feel like that's I don't feel like that's a battle a hill they want to die on.
I still do not understand the argument that it is better for developers to create apps for Android instead of Windows 10X. In 1 year or 2 years, Android will have all these great for touch first double screen experiences, and Windows 10X will have nothing. Then Microsoft is supposed to ask developers to start developing for Windows 10X at that point? Question mark. Well, we don't actually know how the development story is going to play out for 10X and Duo. There could be a platform where you write once and it runs on both platforms. We don't know at this point. Microsoft has been very vague regarding how app developers can build apps for Neo and
Yeah,
Duo.
there's supposed to be shared APIs between Duo
Yeah.
and Neo.
Yes.
And same with the Microsoft, the Edge, cloud computing, I'm talking about stuff that it accesses. So there's supposed to be overlap between them.
And also, I don't recall Microsoft saying that they want developers to build apps for the Duo instead of the Neo. I think they were saying build for both. Build where it makes sense to build. Because not all apps make sense on a phone and not all apps make sense on a PC. So pick your battles where it makes sense as a developer. If your app makes sense on both, then do both. Otherwise, don't.
You're also like, they're saying like they're going to have all these. I mean, you have to remember, Neo is a device, but
Yeah.
we know Dell, we know Lenovo, we know HP also all have dual screen devices coming too. And if you don't know that, well, I'm telling you that. It's like there's going to be a whole sub market of these PCs out there, just like there'll be a whole sub market of Android phones out there. Now, if you want to go and tell me that Android tablets and Android computers are going to be a thing, or then go buy one right now and use it. You won't though, because you're not stupid, right? No one's really buying these unless you're like you want a $300 Chromebook. Their ideas are interesting, but everybody also knows that the Chrome OS is in flux. It runs the Android apps, but we also know that there's Fuchsia on the horizon, whatever that may be, right? So, like I said, these are two separate categories. Microsoft is pretty adamant that things that are larger than 10 inches, you're going to want a real computer, and that's where these dual screen computers are going to be a thing. Things that are 8 inches or smaller are going to be where phones reign, and that's where Android is going to win. That's all there is to it. Now, you may say, I don't want a dual screen PC, and that's totally fine. Just like a lot of people are going to say they don't want dual screen phones. It's the same problem. Same problem with pricing. Same problems with using. Like they both face the same issues, I would say. So, but at the end of the day, the Surface Pro Neo is still a PC. It's still a computer that runs Windows 10.
What are your thoughts on the new Moto Razr? I really like the idea. I just hate that they've made it suck internally. It's like a mid-range phone for the price of a top-end iPhone. So what are they doing? The form factor is super premium flagship, but then the actual specs of the overall experience is a mid-ranger. It's like why would you do this to me?
Yeah, I think it looks cool. I think it's someone made a interesting analogy to like maybe this will be interesting in a couple of years if we look back at this moment and this is the new Razor is either the PT Cruiser of its time or like what they mean is like the PT Cruiser when it came out, everybody thought this was gonna be kind of like a new kind of car and it turned out to be just like a a flash in the pan kind of thing. I think what's interesting about the new Razer is it's opening up people's imaginations to the power and the benefit of having dual screens. Because you see a lot of people like, oh yeah, now it's like half the size, and this makes more sense than the Samsung Fold, and that's fine. Like you're going to see companies, except what this is going to happen in PC, by the way. You're going to see companies experiments. I said this before. Like when the two-in-ones came out for PC, you saw all sorts of weird and radical designs. Some worked, some didn't. Some stuck around, most didn't. You're going to see the same thing with dual screen phones, where some are going to make sense to you, some won't make sense. Sometimes you'll buy one, sometimes you won't. I think it's good at inspiring people to think about it. I don't, and when I look at it, I'm like, oh, that's kind of cool. I wouldn't mind having it. But then, like Zach, $1,500 for a Snapdragon 700 thing with an okay single camera that's locked to Verizon. It doesn't even have a SIM card. It's only eSIM, which means that you have to find a compatible carrier that'll take it. Like, there's just so many things, I think the expectation here, too, from Motorola is like, I don't think they think they're going to sell a ton of these. But I think it's an interesting concept device. But
I feel like they felt like they had to make it because the rumors from like 3 years ago, they were like, oh, Motorola's going to make the return. It's going to be amazing. And Moto went, damn it, we've got to make this thing now. So they just did it.
The real interesting thing to think about is the fact that this is made with Lenovo, who spent a lot of time on the engineering of the hinge.
Yeah.
And if Lenovo already announced a foldable screen PC, in case you forgot, that happened in June. Mm-hmm. It's coming out next year. It's running Windows 10X. That's what I was talking about earlier. It's the same group that's been working on that technology. So when people were talking about, oh, Samsung can't even do a folding screen without it breaking. Well, this is how Lenovo and Motorola are approaching the problem. They clearly have different ideas. Yeah. And that's what I keep saying. Like, I get the criticism over folding displays. Oh, they could break. It's plastic. Like, these are valid. These are also solvable engineering problems that will be fixed. Like the idea that in 2 or 3 years that dual screen and foldable screen devices aren't common to me is absurd. Like all this stuff will be fixed and solved.
Interestingly, the foldable screen on the Razer is interesting because when it's flipped out entirely, it doesn't have a crease in it. So they figured out a way to get rid of that now, and it's only been a few months since the Galaxy Fold, and that was like its biggest criticism outside of the it being a thing that falls apart. We've all somehow we're already figuring that out. So where foldable screens are going to be in a year or 2 years is really interesting.
We also weren't allowed to take photos or show you the hinge of the Lenovo foldable PC for that kind of reason, because some of that stuff is proprietary and kind of didn't want to give away their secrets. There's also stuff about that device you haven't seen yet. Stuff's exciting, So.
Yeah, someone's asking, can you predict the price of Surface Duo and Neo? I think the Duo will be $1,500 and the Duo will be $2,000 starting.
Yeah, that's probably fair.
If it's any more than that, then Christ. Microsoft, chill out.
Will you review the new 16-inch MacBook Pro? No. I mean, it's not that I'm against it. I have Macs here and stuff like that. It's just that I don't have the time. I'm still
and they suck.
Way behind on laptop reviews that I owe other companies that are way more relevant. I'd rather review the new ThinkPad X1 Carbon than a MacBook 16. If I had all the time in the world, I'd review the MacBook 16. But
all right, and with that, I think that just about does it. Anything else, Dan, or are you done?
Nah, I think that's okay.
Cool. Thank you for watching, guys. We'll be back next week, as always, with another episode of the podcast. But until then, goodbye.